The nation of Andoran has been an emerging power on the Inner Sea's geopolitical stage ever since it separated from Cheliax and established itself as the first nation-sized, democratically governed republic in all of Galarian. It's a country we've talked around in numerous other videos, including my regional deep dive of Taldor and my regional deep dive of Cheliax, and it's finally time to take a deeper look at this nation, its unique cultural heritage, and the impact its politics have had on the rest of the Inner Sea region. Let's start, as we always do, with the history of Andoran. Although Andoran's human history is relatively recent, the land itself is more ancient than humanity's visitations. In the Aspodell Mountains that define the nation's western border, there lies one of the largest passages into the Darklands, a vast network of tunnels known as the Candlestone Caverns. From these yawning depths in the Age of Serpents, modern Andoran was claimed by the Serpent Folk. In many ways, modern Andoran was the heart of the Serpent Folk Surface Empire, as it sat halfway between the northern capital of Zverenagati in the Kodar Mountains and the southern capital of Ilmuria in the Mwangi Expanse. Towards the end of the Age of Serpents, the humans of the nearby island continent of Aslant formed a strategic alliance with the Golgan Empire, a Cyclops Empire located in western Garand, and with the Elves of Kionin, Mirani, and the Mwangi jungle to launch a three-pronged strike at the Serpent Folk. They struck at Zverenagati in the north, at Ilmuria in the south, and they established a beachhead in the lands that would become modern-day Andoran in the center. Before the Earthfall Cataclysm, the Inner Sea was just a long river, barely separating Avestan and Garand, so the fortress that the Aslanti constructed here to serve as a secure redoubt for the armies they were dispatching to besiege the Candlestone Caverns inevitably collapsed into the sea. The sunken ruins of the Aslanti fortress have survived to this day, now called the Clace Redoubt, named for a small village called Clace located along the Missa Shelf just southwest of the capital city of Almas. With the defeat of the Serpent Folk in the Candlestone Caverns, other powers came to the Darklands to replace them. Exiled from the First World at the end of the Age of Serpents, a tribe of Darkling Fae known as the Court of Ether took over the Darklands' hold of the Serpent Folk. Though sinister in nature, these Fae, led by Queen Frilogarma, established a truce with the Aslanti above, which desired nothing more than to ensure the Serpent Folk would not have the chance to return to power again beneath their feet. As the Age of Serpents gave way to the Age of Legends, the coastlines of Andoran would be rarely trafficked by early humans. Apart from the small Aslanti outposts, these lands were too far to the east for the earliest Chelish peoples to travel to, and too far to the west for the earliest Taldans. Only the brave and nomadic Kelids made use of this coastline. The Kelids, as discussed in my Mammoth Lords and Druma deep dive video, had formed large communities north of Avestan, particularly in the heart of the Palikar Forest, as well as southwest of the forest, along the Konerica and Keld rivers of modern-day Isgir. These Kelid tribes were the first to discover the Isgir Pass, the safest land route that cuts across a shallow valley between the Five Kings Mountains in the east and the Aspodell Mountains in the west. Kelid nomads would journey across the mountain pass and follow the Foam River from its source at the Gold Falls at the southwestern end of the Five Kings Mountains down to where it meets the mighty Andoshan, and further down south to where the Andoshan met the now extinct river that stood where the Inner Sea does now. These nomads would winter where the modern city of Almas is now located, because Andoran stayed temperate and pleasant even in the coldest months, and then they would travel back up through the pass to the settled Kelid villages of ancient Isgir and Druma in the spring months, when the northern frost would begin to thaw. When the Earthfall Cataclysm occurred, the lands of Andoran were too unsettled to lead to mass deaths, but the physical impact shattered the coastline, giving rise to the Inner Sea and burying the Aslanti fortress along the Andoran coast. Those Aslanti that had remained in the area as part of the strategic alliance with Queen Frilogarma and the Court of Ether made one of two choices. Those further inland made for the Candlestone Caverns. Queen Frilogarma protected them from the collapsing world, and it was under her care that the first Caligni, or Darkfolk, emerged, descended from the Aslanti survivors of the Andoran outposts. The Darkfolk claimed the lands directly above the Court of Ether, a place called the Shadow Caverns, where they continue to dwell to this day. And the Darkling Fae rely on them to protect them from surface folk invaders that might come from above. Those Aslanti stationed at the Clace Redoubt collapsed with the structure into the sea. Some among their number were able to use magic to keep the fortress relatively intact as it sank beneath the waves, while others, realizing the entire shelf was going to trap them under the sea for the foreseeable future, used transmutation magic so that they might breathe underwater while they looked for a way out. Over the long, hard years of the Age of Darkness, these Aslanti would become permanently adapted to life underwater, and thus emerged the Azarketi people, aquatic humanoids. In fact, Azarketi would continue to use the Claes readout over the years, and in so doing slowly establish a friendship with the eventual Taldan settlers of Andoran. The Kelids likewise retreated to their holdings in the north, and Andoran became a wild land for 1,000 years, claimed by various monstrous humanoids and creatures of the night. In this time of darkness, the dwarves also braved the perilous trek up from the recesses of the world and conquered the rugged mountain range north of Andoran that would become known as the Five Kings Mountains. The dwarves also conquered the lands north of the Five Kings Mountains, establishing colonized Druma, but they did not turn their attention southwards because the lands were too wild and unsettled and held no strategic value to them. Indeed, few humans traveled to the lands of ancient Andoran back then. Only when the Age of Anguish brought the sunlight creeping back into the world did the Kelid nomads rediscover their old roads from Isgir to the Andoran coast. Despite the return of the sun and some occasional Kelid visitors, it took civilization a long time to return to this corner of the world. In -1295, the human hero Taldaris united the humans of the land just east of Andoran under a single banner, and eventually established the nation of Taldor. But for the first 1,000 years of Taldan history, they made no attempts to conquer the wild hinterlands to the west of Taldor. It wasn't until after Taldaris' mentor, the immortal Aslanti named Aradin, raised the Starstone, established the island nation of Absalom, and ascended to godhood, that the Taldans began to consider expanding their holdings and spreading the new Ardnite faith to the other lands. When they did so, they first ventured northwards, conquering Galt and the southern river kingdoms in the year 37. They deployed a second great army in the year 499 to increase their holdings in the north and around Lake Incarthen, but they didn't formally begin to venture west until the Third Army in 1521. However, by that time, Taldor had been a growing empire for almost 3,000 years, and that is a long time to expect people not to move across a porous border. Informally, settlement of Andoran by communities of adventurous Taldans had been going on at a slow rate across the Sellen River for a long time. But it was quite difficult for these early settlers. Here the settlers encountered the goblin, the hobgoblin, and the orc, and defended their farmsteads against them bitterly with sword and spear. For a brief while these brave homesteaders even named this new kingdom of theirs. They called it Andoran, and they named an influential warrior named Alvistus to be their first king. By 1521, Taldor made formal plans to conquer the Westerlands. General Corin was given command of the Third Great Army, and he found the lands along the coastline, where human settlement had already begun, to be easy to secure, but the northern lands, which were still held by orcs and goblins, to be treacherous. It's for this reason that although Andoran was the first region General Corin entered after crossing the Sellen and marching west, that Corin did not take the entire country. Instead, he established a line of fortresses all along the coast so that they could hold the line, but he continued westwards until he crossed the Aspodell mountains in the west and encountered the native Chelish people of the western reaches of Avestan. There the Chelish people were quickly incorporated into the empire, and the Taldans found them to be a people amenable to their message, and the conquest of western Cheliax thereafter went very quickly. The city of Westcrown was established as a provincial capital, and the city of Carpenden, named for the general himself, was established to demarcate the furthest western reaches of the new Taldan Empire. Meanwhile, back in Andoran, although the settlers had proved willing to allow the Taldan army access to Andoran and approved of the construction of forts and roads, they had not abandoned their own line of kings. At this time, Andoran was considered an occupied territory, and not a formal prefecture, and the current king, Alvistus IV, found himself negotiating terms with a Taldan-appointed landgrave regarding the occupation. An accord was struck between the Andoran king and the Taldan Empire. The Taldan Empire would help secure Andoran's northern wilds, up to the border with the Five Kings Mountains, and in exchange King Alvistus would agree to have Andoran incorporated as a formal prefecture of the Taldan Empire. With this agreed to in 1683, General Castalis of Corentin launched the Fourth Great Army. By all accounts, the Fourth Army's campaign for northern Andoran was among the most brutal and bloody campaigns run by any of the great Taldan generals. Castalis fought a bloody war with the region's orcs and goblins, but he also massacred many of the wild fey creatures that had made their home in the Arthfell forest in the center of the country. In the Wolfrun Hills and along the River Foam, all the way up to the Isgir Pass, Castalis' forces also butchered the indigenous Kelids that had traveled these rivers since time immemorial. Andoran was won, but it was won with blood. By 1707, the land was all secured, and King Alvistus IV abided by the terms of the compact. He stepped down as king, and a Taldan Grand Duke was named as governor of the new prefecture. In the new prefecture, the brutal killings of the Arthfell's Fey population during the Fourth Army had not only secured human dominance in the region, but also made the Arthfell one of the safer woodlands in the Taldan Empire for logging. Lumber companies from across the empire came to build mills around the Arthfell, and soon a near-endless supply of timber fueled the growth of Andoran cities. By 1750, nearly all of Taldor's naval vessels came from the port of Augustana. In the year 2080, as discussed in my recent Central Mwangi Expanse video, the Taldans plotted their sixth great army of exploration. With the growing naval power of the prefecture of Andoran, this army ended up being composed of thousands of militiamen conscripted from the Andoran prefecture, and from here they launched a costly invasion of the Kelishite Empire, beaching at the lands that would one day become Katapesh. Praise for the Taldan general of the Sixth Army, Strategos Erestos Marbaran, initially flooded in from the mainland, especially from Andoran, from where he hailed originally. However, he pushed too far to the west, and the guerrilla king and an army of intelligent apes came screaming out of the jungle and massacred his army in an ambush. Strategos Marbaran was slain, and his forces dispersed. This major setback is often seen as the beginning of the Taldan decline period. Nevertheless, Taldor continued to embark on major projects to galvanize national pride and prove its power as the center of culture in the world. In 2606, the Taldan Empire constructed the massive Arch of Aridin, an enormous bridge connecting the continents of Avestan and Garand. In the waning years of the 41st century, the Taldan Empire found itself stretched thin, its ruling aristocracy entangled in internal conflicts over land and politics. Capitalizing on this vulnerability, the Kelishite Empire unleashed an army of over 40,000 troops, breaching Taldor's southern border and sparking a protracted 500-year conflict between the two powers. The most devastating blow to the empire, however, occurred in the west. In 4081, Governor Aspects of Cheliax declared the independence of his province and proclaimed himself an independent sovereign. Aspects catalyzed a wave of secession as other territories followed suit, leading to the annexation of Andoran, Galt, and Isger. This finally marked the end of Taldor's centuries-long dominance in Avestan. In 4438, Narvan Feathereyes, High Druid of the ancient religion of the Green Faith, declared himself king of the Arthfell Forest. The Forest King, as he is known, closed the borders of the forest and directly opposed the exploitation of its natural wonders by the Lumber Consortium and other concerns. Against the advice of both the Chelish crown and the trio of barons under him, Earl, the Count of Elberwick, recognized the Forest King and entered into numerous mutually beneficial treaties with him. Forest King Narvan and Count Earl of Elberwick became fast friends and staunch allies, and Forest King Narvan recanted his closing of the border after a few months, allowing his chosen allies to harvest certain darkwood and softwoods north of the Elberwick Rise. Despite Druidic opposition, the lumber conglomerates and other merchant factions continued to grow in power in this period. As also discussed in my recent Aspis Consortium faction guide, under Chelish rule, Greater Cheliax, including the province of Andoran, witnessed the emergence of a very prosperous merchant class, whose wealth and influence began to rival the traditional nobility. Over the course of the next century, the province experienced sustained social and economic growth. Of course, the death of prophecy in 4606 changed everything. The death of the god Aridin caused a broad collapse of the Aridinite faith across Cheliax, and of course plunged it into a bloody civil war. Although initially there were numerous factions vying for power, eventually the most powerful claimants to the throne became the houses of Thrun and Davian. House Davian's power came from the support of various mercantile factions, but most importantly came from the wealth of Cheliax's various Garundi holdings, including the wealth coming in from the pirates of the Shackles and from the colony of Sargava on the mainland. On the other hand, House Thrun's power came from an infernal contract with the devil god Asmodeus and the powers of Hell, as well as from a strategic alliance with the Nidalese Shadow Lords. Neither option presented an ideal monarch, but naturally the province of Andoran largely supported the slightly less sinister House Davian. House Davian's ambitions came to an end when they suffered a heavy defeat to House Thrun at the Battle of 100 Kings in 4639. Following Queen Abigail's takeover of the Western Territories, Andoran's provincial governor, Culliam IV, and a faction of the ruling aristocracy sought peace by submitting to the Queen's demand for fealty. Andoran was therefore retained by the Empire of Cheliax after the Thrun victory. Andoran's western neighbor Galt, also previously a member state of the Chelish Empire, followed suit and accepted Thrun rule. The introduction of the Asmodean faith and the construction of Asmodean temples to major Galtan and Andoran cities was not met well by the local populace, who being further away from the Thrune power centers could feel their civil liberties being slowly taken away from them. It was the Galtish intelligentsia that first galvanized sentiment against the Thrunish overlords. In 4662, a Galtish philosopher named Darl Ubannik wrote a book titled On Government, a treatise about how the Chelish government was not only a betrayal of the concept of governance, but also in truth a terrible betrayal of humanity itself. It was shockingly anti-Thrune, in a time when fear was very much in the air. Agents of the House of Thrune were dispatched to Galt to find and execute Darl Ubannik. They could not reach him. Together with fellow revolutionary philosopher Hosseter Half-Elven, Darl helped trigger the Red Revolution, a public uprising to resist Chelish rule. The Red Revolutionaries began executing members of the Thrune-backed government, until the government in Galt collapsed and Galt declared itself independent in 4667. Although we now know that the Galtish Revolution would not work out so well for Galt, in the early years the Red Revolution was inspirational to the Andorans, who felt brutally oppressed by the Thrune-backed lords who governed them. In Andoran, dissidents fueled by Galtan philosophical ideals emerged from the growing middle class, refusing to surrender their rights and privileges. Educated and inspired, they rallied Andorans to demand freedom and overthrow the remnants of the old aristocracy. Young nobles renounced their titles en masse, joining with the nation's emerging bourgeoisie and even its struggling working class to envision a new kind of society. Tensions reached a boiling point in 4669. As massive riots erupted in Almas and Augustana, plunging the nation into a full-scale revolt. The People's Revolt, as it came to be known, saw merchants and commoners joining forces with dissidents. They took to the streets, and they brought a swift death to all Thrune loyalists working in government, and interred or exiled those in other walks of life. The temples of Asmodeus were knocked down, brick by brick. At the Capitol building in Almas, the revolutionaries had gathered. With victory near at hand, here they faced the great dilemma that Galt was facing in the east. Per the teachings of Darl Ubannik, it was time for something new. Young aristocrats, wealthy merchants, and struggling workers had all fought together in the revolution, but now came the real moment of truth. For the remaining aristocracy, Thrune-backed or no, the revolutionaries presented a simple choice: surrender of titles or exile. Perhaps it was the closer proximity to the threat of Cheliax that made the People's Revolt turn out differently from the Red Revolution, but in Andoran, the majority of the aristocracy, even those with old family names dating back to the dawn of the Taldan Empire, willingly relinquished their positions and titles. The revolution was shockingly swift, culminating in the declaration of Andoran independence as a free and sovereign democratic republic before the end of the year. This sense of internal alignment among the various factions also allowed them to focus on the most important thing to the young nation, securing their western border against reprisal from Cheliax. Cheliax did not immediately respond to Andoran independence by invading with a land force, although it is true that on various occasions in this first year, Hell Knights and other agents of the Chelish state did test the new nation's border and defenses. However, Queen Abigail needed to be resource-conscious in the post-Civil War period, so instead they started by responding with economic sanctions. Cheliax effectuated an immediate embargo on all Andoran goods. They also immediately assembled their fleets to begin a blockade of Andoran ports and paid privateers to seize Andoran vessels. This naval conflict began almost immediately after Andoran acquired independence and would last for over 2 decades. Long before the Chelish-Andoran conflict would finally begin to cool, only a year after Andoran independence, Imperial Cheliax would experience a significant symbolic setback. In 4670, the Arch of Aradin cracked, and the central third of the Great Bridge collapsed into the sea. As discussed in my earlier history section, the Andorans had built a friendly relationship with the Azarketi of the Claes Redoubt, not far from Almas. After the arch collapsed, the Andorans' Azarketi allies sent a team out to recover the central arch of the building. It has since ended up in Almas, where it is proudly displayed in the city. Also that year, Andoran held its first general popular election, first electing a governing body of 100 or so elected representatives from across the nation called the People's Council, which in turn voted on the country's first executive leader, called the Supreme Elect. In 4672, there was more news from Galt. The Revolutionary Council, the new Galtish government, established by the now famous revolutionaries of Darl Ubannik and Hosseter Half-Elven, was overthrown by a new set of counter-revolutionaries. Hosseter met his death at the hands of one of the dreaded Final Blades, while Darl survived the Second Revolution by fleeing to Andoran. He is quite old now, but he is still alive by all accounts. His exact current whereabouts are unknown, however, as the Andoran government have kept him in hiding to keep him safe from both Thrunish assassins and reprisals from the Grey Gardeners of Galt, who stopped recognizing him as a key figure in Galt's original revolution. In 4689, Andoran finally managed to bring an end to the Chelish blockades of their major ports. After almost 20 years of maritime warfare, the Andoran navy managed to win a significant victory against its better-funded western rival. With one of its major flagships sunk, Cheliax agreed that it was proving too costly to maintain this constant fight along its eastern border. They dropped the embargo, and open hostilities have since been replaced by a cold tension that lingers even to this day. Cheliax and Andoran continue to not like each other, and they are opposed to everything that the other nation stands for. In 4697, the Goblin Blood Wars broke out in neighboring Isgir, threatening the stability of the entire region. As discussed in my recent Druma video, Andoran finally established itself here as a regional power by sending a legion of Eagle Knights to assist in quelling the Hobgoblin uprising. In 4699, an enormous red dragon emerged from the smouldering pit of Droskar's Crag in the Five Kings Mountains. The ancient worm carved a path of ruin and terror across Andoran before retiring to its volcanic lair. In the last 20 years, Daralathixil, as he is called, has never since made such a brazen raid on the country, but he has often made his presence known, especially in the region closest to the mountains known as the Darkmoon Vale. Daralathixil is also discussed in more detail in my Dragon's Creature feature. In 4704, Codwyn I of Augustana was elected Supreme Elect of Andoran. Codwyn was re-elected to a second term in 4708 in a landslide victory, and again in 4712, albeit with a narrower margin. Leading up to the 4716 election, Supreme-elect Codwyn agreed to step down and established a precedent that no Supreme-elect would serve for more than 3 consecutive terms. Supreme-elect Andira Murasek, formerly a general and commander of the Steel Falcons, was elected in 4716, and she was re-elected in 4720. As we are getting into the year 2024 in our world, she is about to enter into another election year in hers. Her popularity remains high, so it is likely she will be elected again in 4724 for a third and final governing term. This brings us to today. The people and culture of Andoran. As indicated on its full coat of arms, Andoran's motto is Efrir ep Bered, ancient Taldane for free and ready. The Andoran people of today are predominantly a Taldan-descended people, but because the country has gained a reputation as a bastion of liberty, numerous other ethnic groups, especially defected Chelish peoples, but also Varisians from the northwest, Iobarians from the northeast, and various Garundi people who have emigrated from the south, also make their homes there. Only the Kelids are rarely found in large numbers in Andoran today, as they have a long memory, and recall well that the establishment of the original Andoran province of Taldor led them to massacre large numbers of Kelids to acquire that land. A number of non-humans also comprise the Andoran population, including Leshies and Gnomes, which are found in the various woodland areas, as well as halflings, forlorn elves, half-elves, and half-orcs. Like Kelids, full-blood orcs are rare, but they also had significant numbers in this area at one point of time in Andoran history. Although Andoran has a long history as a province of both the Empire of Taldor and the Empire of Cheliax, the defining moment in Andoran history was of course its separation from Cheliax. As mentioned earlier, in 4639, the thrice-cursed infernal House of Thrun won the Chelish Civil War at the Battle of 100 Kings. 30 years later, Andoran declared independence from Cheliax. 30 years may not seem like such a long time in the grand scheme of things, especially not given the millennia of history that covers the rise and fall of various civilizations across the Inner Sea, but for the people of Andoran, those 30 years were enormously significant. Considerably closer to the heartlands of Cheliax than Galt in the east, Andoran well and truly felt the awesome power of hell at its doorstep. This united all of their people with a single cause, rich and poor alike. It brought together a unique alignment of goals and purpose that overcame many of the traditional divisions that have kept people apart from each other. As a result of this powerful galvanizing force, Andoran had a much more successful revolution than Galt. Today, after having spent centuries as a subordinate state under foreign monarchies, Andoran has transformed into the first large, democratically governed republic in the Inner Sea. Fueled by a flourishing lumber industry and abundant economic resources, the burgeoning empire has evolved into a substantial and influential global power. Nevertheless, Andoran's most significant export remains its advocacy for freedom. This is because the new foundational culture of Andoran rests on core principles of equality, fraternity, and liberty. In accordance with the writings of Galtan philosopher Darl Ubannik, the state serves the people, not the other way around, and no individual is inherently worth more than another. In his book, On Government, he posits that the decisions of the majority should stand as the ultimate and conclusive determinants of justice. Governed in this manner, he argues, the less affluent gain influence over the more prosperous due to their numerical majority. For most Andorans, Darl's work in his famous On Government is not just a piece of searingly smart intellectual posturing, it's much deeper than that, and it also takes on a spiritual, even religious dimension. This is because, according to popular legend, Darl Ubannik did not develop his thesis on government in a vacuum. He is reputed to have travelled far and wide in his youth, and made the acquaintance of an Evoril named Talmandor. Talmandor is the leader of the Evoril Agathians, and second only in power to the imperial lord Illimancha among the Avian Celestials. Illimancha and the Evorils are discussed in more detail in my Agathians deep dive video, linked in the description below. This possibly apocryphal history may well be true. Like many Agathians, Talmandor took an interest in influencing mortals and bringing them to a place of enlightenment. He was convinced that the greatest enlightenment for mortals could be achieved through social interaction. Observing that mortals responded best to full, robust engagement with their fellow citizens, he shared his view with several mortals that hereditary aristocracy and primogeniture served as shackles, slowing society's ascent into a place of justice and peace. Darl's own work was heavily influenced by this creature of the heavens, and this is why for many in Andoran, On Government transcends mortal work. In certain regions of Andoran, the admiration for Talmandor has transcended mere respect and evolved into outright worship. For his part, the Agathian has steadfastly rejected the pursuit of godhood, firmly believing that he could better serve as an inspiration to the cause of democratic freedom without the trappings of true divinity. Although Talmandor has rejected the mantle of divinity, many in Andoran, including a growing number of oracles and paladins, revere him anyway, as a nascent demigod embodying the virtues of hope, liberty, and community. Shrines dedicated to Talmandor now flourish in small congregations all across the country. Despite his close association with the country, Talmandor has also been selective in providing assistance, choosing to aid only those whom he felt have earned the right to call upon aid from the heavens. However, he has often appeared to speak at the behest of the People's Council, and even occasionally attended meetings of smaller city and town councils as a guest. Talmandor has said on more than one occasion that he would intervene directly to protect Andoran only if the nation faced a threat it could not handle on its own. His regular presence, though, has provided Andoran with a level of protection, as Andoran's enemies, most notably Cheliax, are well aware of his interest in the nation. It is in fact Darl Ubannik's association with the Evoril that has created the close association between the nation of Andoran and birds of prey, especially eagles. Talmandor's avian form helped to inspire the establishment of the first Eagle Knights, and Talmandor himself is known to be a patron of the Steel Falcons Order. When the Andoran revolutionaries secured control of the capital in 4669, they took great pains to ensure that Darl's work would not get corrupted over time, and that the new government they established would remain one that functioned to serve the people, rather than the other way around. To safeguard and future-proof their nation against the slow erosion of values, the founders established a formal constitution, named the Associative Act, grounded in their fundamental principles of liberty, equality, and democracy. Nonetheless, an ongoing debate persisted, even among those with shared love for Darl's work. The devil is always in the details. Many advocated for straightforward laws, enforced by a robust, centralized authority, while others advocated for a more diversified distribution of power to all citizens. The former group cautioned against the anarchic effect of an increasingly decentralized government, warning of the potential for order to break down, akin to that seen in the bloody nation of Galt. Perhaps because of this, the majority of citizens continue to support a robust, centralized government with strong executive power, but relying on elected officials so the people choose a government to represent them, but have limited control over it once that government is elected. Another dimension to life in Andoran is the growing power of mercantile factions, including such entities as the Aspis Consortium, the various wealthy Andoran logging conglomerates, and three powerful banking families, the Godfields, the Narans, and the Valens. After the revolution was won against the Thrune overlords, the first act of the new government was to deny all nobility their titles. Overnight, earls, barons, dukes, and princes all became commoners, effectively. If they had inherited rights to land, they lost those rights as well. They did not, however, lose their homes and moneys, but they lost significant power and influence. The power shifted dramatically from old nobility to wealthy merchant princes. The new government struggles woefully to control and contain the power of the free market, and the most powerful men and women of Andoran don't have fancy titles, but they do have one thing: money. Striking deals with the calistocrats of Druma, the nobility of Taldor, and the protected merchant houses of Cheliax and Malthun, Andoran's wealthy elite are increasingly becoming a new sort of noble class, the very thing the revolution sought to eliminate in the first place. The coins minted by the new banking elite of Andoran, however, cleverly showcase symbols of the revolution. Copper coins featuring the Phrygian cap, a Galtish symbol of their early revolutionary thought. Silver coins featuring the visage of none other than Darl Yabanek himself. Gold coins featuring the warships that helped break the Chelish blockades, and platinum coins featuring the mighty eagle of Andoran. Let's now return to the subject of religion. Although I've mentioned the prominence of the cult of Talmandor and worship of the imperial lord Ilimancha, overall Andoran has similar religious practices today as the nation of Taldor. Originally, the state religion of Andoran was the same as the religion all across the empires of Taldor and Cheliax, the worship of Aradin. As discussed in my Taldor deep dive video, after Aradin's death in 4606, Taldor turned to other benevolent deities, especially Erastil in the farmlands, Caden Kalian in the villages and smaller settlements, Abadar in the large cities and among the mercantile elite, and finally Shaelin among artisans, craftsmen, and performers. In Andoran, they also turned to these deities as well, to a certain extent, but because they were swept up in a civil war, a war in which the enemy was determined to make Asmodeus the new prevailing faith, many in Andoran turned instead to worship of Aradin's herald and greatest disciple, Iomade. Iomade was a more militant goddess than Erastil, Caden, and Abadar, and her creed spoke directly to the challenges faced by the Andoran people in the face of the death of prophecy. As such, along with the other more neutral deities, her faith continues to see widespread adoption in Andoran even to this day. Because of the large number of Iomadeans in Andoran, Andoran's most powerful military regiments, especially the Eagle Knights, are commonly comprised of a great many paladins of Iomade. These paladins often serve tours of duty abroad, especially in the former nation of Lastwall and in the current region known as the Gravelands, or further north during the various Mendevian crusades against the Worldwound. Because these Andoran paladins are frequently found abroad, often proudly touting the many great qualities of their nation, they often give the false impression to outsiders that worship of Iomade is more widespread than it actually is. In truth, many diverse faiths find their home in Andoran, and many temples and churches contain multiple shrines to allow for various forms of worship. The legacy of resisting Chelish rule remains strong, however, and evil deities, especially the worship of Asmodeus, is strictly prohibited in most parts of Andoran. A final cultural note on Andoran, and it concerns the popular game of Prismati. Prismati traces its origins as a game played by the Fey inhabitants of the Verduran Forest, which was a game of throwing gemstones and also involved vibrant feathers, scarves, and patches of colored ground. Observers witnessed these Fey playing this complex game, and some, in an effort to make the game accessible to humans, simplified it and named it Prismati. This game involves two teams, each comprising 9 players, a thrower, a setter, and 7 catchers. Setters from opposing teams compete to establish an order of colors, and the thrower must accurately throw painted stones to catchers stationed in appropriately colored areas. Should a catcher grab the wrong stone, they can pass it off to another teammate, but numerous meticulous rules govern how this exchange can occur. In more refined circles among the wealthier citizenry, leather juggling balls are often substituted for rocks to ensure safety. However, the majority of Prismati enthusiasts hail from the children of timbermen or farmers, who can't afford such luxuries. Purists argue that part of the game's challenge lies in handling the rocks without causing injury, dismissing juggling balls as an inferior alternative. The Government of Andoran. The primary governing entity in Andoran is the People's Council. Originally comprised of about 100 elected representatives, this body has now bloated to include 350 representatives, each elected by their respective regional populations. Councillors serve 5-year terms and play crucial roles in appointing magistrates, debating laws, and interpreting and implementing the Associative Act. Annually, the People's Council also designates one member as its public spokesperson, and the current People's Voice is Yarlissa Ermedas, a former revolutionary and seasoned politician from Almas, currently in her 3rd term. Councillors advocate for the concerns of their constituents in various forums and small councils held throughout the year, where much of the nation's governance takes place. Formal council sessions occur twice a year in the city of Almas, and typically last from 3 days to a week, though debates on divisive issues may extend longer. For the rest of the year, councillors may be called upon to preside over minor or local public discussions called moots, initiated by a citizen's council, mayor, or magistrate. Moots are often held in community halls, accommodating public assemblies of 50 to several hundred people, providing an avenue for common citizens to voice their concerns. The People's Council is also responsible for holding 2 additional elections for other government appointments. They elect the Supreme Elect, the nation's executive leader, and they elect the Supreme Vicar. The Supreme Vicar is responsible for providing spiritual guidance to the nation, as well as investigating the corrupting influence of dark cults and faiths. To this end, the Supreme Vicar liaises with the 3 most prominent high clerics in the country, representing the faiths of Iomedae, Abadar, and Erastil. She also coordinates directly with Marshal Helena Trellis, the leader of the Twilight Talons, the Andoran espionage organization, and has direct oversight over a secretive and elite group of mostly Iomedaean inquisitors who are tasked with rooting out spiritual corruption in the nation. The current Supreme Vicar is Maud Loren, a taciturn and calculated woman, and a renowned spiritual leader among the nation's faithful of Ilimancha. The Supreme Elect is the country's high executive leader, and serves as the ultimate commander of Andoran's military units and armed forces. The Supreme Elect is also supported by the Demarquee Assembly, a cabinet of 30 appointed ministers overseeing various government offices, including finance, foreign affairs, internal justice, trade and commerce, and the treasury. They are assigned to these specific bureaucratic positions directly by the Supreme Elect. The Supreme Elect also assigns a number of consuls, specialists who serve as designated advisors to the Supreme Elect on various subjects of specialty, but most commonly on military matters and on issues of national defense. The current Supreme Elect of Andoran is Andira Murasek. Andira is originally from the bustling port of Augustana, where relative affluence granted her a life of comfort. However, tragedy struck when Andira was only 15 during a journey to Jalmaray Island. Slaver galleys from Katapesh intercepted her ship, accosted her, and forced her to work as a rower and deck swab for almost 6 months. Andira was rescued by the Grey Corsairs, the naval arm of Andoran's Order of Eagle Knights, who specialize in raiding slaver vessels. Rescue by the Andoran Eagle Knights gave Andira an unexpected sense of purpose. She made it her goal to join the Eagle Knights to help others, much as the Grey Corsairs had helped her. In fact, Andira was still only 17 when she made her way to Almas to present herself at the Golden Eyrie to join the Eagle Knights. She exhibited an insatiable appetite for learning. She delved into the arts of diplomacy, negotiation, politics, and philosophy with the same fervor she displayed on the battlefield. Her mastery of these subjects swiftly propelled her into a coveted role within the Eagle Knights' Twilight Talons branch, distinguishing her as one of the youngest to achieve such status among the Eagle Knights. She eventually tired of espionage and joined the Steel Falcons, with ambitions of becoming a more public figure. She publicly pushed for abolition when she could, and boldly raided slaver galleons across the inner sea when policy was not enough. Her experience and success eventually earned her the title of General of the Steel Falcons. By 4716, she had built the necessary reputation to be voted into office as Andoran's new Supreme Elect, a position she took in 4717 on the eve of her 30th birthday. She is currently in the final year of her 2nd term, and coming up for re-election for her 3rd and final term as Supreme Elect. One thing Supreme-Elect Murasek has learned is that although it is commendable that Andoran's citizens have more to say in their fates than most in the Inner Sea region do, this has presented Andira with a unique challenge that most of her fellow leaders don't have to face. Upcoming elections have forced her to juggle her current endeavors with the campaign for re-election, often distracting her and preventing her from achieving some of her goals for both the country and the Inner Sea region at large. The Andoran Gazetteer. The nation of Andoran can be broadly divided into 7 major territories. The Aspodell territory, which runs from the Aspodell Mountains that form the nation's western border all the way to the Arthfell Forest in the center of the country, comprises the country's westernmost territory. The Darkmoon Vale, which lies in the north of the country and which stretches out eastwards from the Isgari Pass around the Five Kings Mountains to the eastern Andoshan River on the other side. The Greater Vale also includes the Darkmoon Plain, which extends from the Foam River to the Arthfell and includes the Darkmoon Wood and the Wolfrun Hills. The Arthfell territory, which comprises the Arthfell Forest, obviously, but also the Arthfell Mountains, the Nagortha Hills, and all the central lands west of the Andoshan that bifurcates the country. The Missa Shelf lies just directly south of the Arthfell, a large hilly peninsula whose coastline is dotted by many villages, forts, and cities, as the inner sea coastline is the lifeblood of Andoran. The Verduran Forest, which comprises the westernmost reaches of the country. The Andoran claim on the Verduran extends as far as the Selen River, which serves as the boundary between it and the nation of Taldor. The rest of the Verduran is therefore Taldan territory, and both nations lay claim to this vast woodland realm. The Carpenden Plains make up the nation's southwestern territory. The breadbasket of Andoran, various farmsteads and small villages make up these picturesque plains. The smallest territory is Freeland, but it is ironically the largest in terms of population. Freeland is wedged between Carpenden and the Missa Shelf, and it comprises the capital city of Almas and its surrounding towns and villages. Aspodell. The Aspodell Mountains are a 350-mile range of steep and jagged mountains that form a natural border between Andoran and Cheliax, and a formidable border it is, the hunting ground of barbaric hill giants and terrifying drakes and wyverns. Only the rugged mountain men of the Aspodell Rangers can claim to have explored the mountain's wilder recesses. While small in comparison to the Five Kings in the north, some of the taller peaks reach heights of nearly 2 miles above sea level. Additionally, although in my maps I draw these lines consistently, the official borders between the two countries remains contested, particularly in the deep reaches of the range, with Cheliax claiming various iron-rich mountains within its territory that Andoran maintains is its land. Frequent border skirmishes means that both sides maintain a standing contingent of armed forces to patrol the border, both along the mountains themselves and along the Aspodell River that marks the southern portion of the border. The greater Aspodell territory encompasses the mountains, its foothills, the Aspodell River, and the lands between these features and the Arthfell Forest. Important locations in the Aspodell Mountains and its surrounding foothills include the Candlestone Caverns. As mentioned in my history section, for millennia the Candlestone Caverns marked the heart of the Serpentfolk civilization in southern Abystan. Named for their massive pale stalagmites resembling melting wax pillars, these intricate limestone caverns extend deep into the Darklands realm of Narvoth. The sheer enormity of these caverns is staggering. In the Age of Darkness, marauding orcs used these passages to coordinate the devastating siege that led to the downfall of the Dwarven Empire of Tar-Targath. Faced with the loss of their homeland, a resilient group of dwarves sacrificed themselves to seal off all surface entrances to the caverns. After this, the caverns appeared unreachable from the surface, except by experts aware of obscure entry points scattered across the remote locations. An earthquake that shook Andoran in 3980, however, recently reopened the caverns, unleashing hordes of subterranean horrors into the sunlit world that had been denied to them for centuries. Since then, kobolds, goblins, gremlins, and various other creatures have plagued the region's settlers, many of whom have abandoned the area altogether. While the earthquake exposed the caverns, it also destroyed much of the upper levels. Uplifted rock sheared many winding passages, others collapsed or were filled with rubble. Some entrances lead to long-abandoned dwarven ruins, while others weave through water-eroded catacombs. In the wake of the collapse, the notorious Black Claw kobolds of the cavern's upper levels began to dig tunnels connecting the cavern's deeper levels to the surface, using them to bait terrifying subterranean horrors to attack the unsuspecting populace and serve them as powerful weapons in surface raids. An underground reservoir called the Tenebrous River separates the upper caverns from the great caverns below, where Duergar settlements can be found. Beneath this, the Shining Grotto, a vast subterranean swamp guarded by primordial neothelid horrors, and the Shadow Caverns, an ancient underground city populated by the Caligni Darkfolk. Dark fissures veil the gateway to deeper caverns that lie even below this, where the stone formations warp unnaturally, leading to a massive cave. At the far end, the Gate of Ether opens to a wide passage, guarded by strange and cryptic fae, demanding tribute to Queen Frilogarma, ruler of the lightless realms beyond. The well-traveled road from the Gate of Ether leads to an incredible fae metropolis, hanging from the ceiling of a vast chamber, surrounded by millions of bats. Few beyond the Darklands know of the Court of Ether, but its presence is felt by all those near Candlestone Caverns, even on the surface. Queen Frilogarma exercises her influence through devoted followers, who hold sway over other fae groups in the Arthfell, the Darkmoon Wood, and even the Verduran. The dark fae's whispers reach their surface world kin, desperate in the face of relentless logging and human civilization's expansion into their sacred wilderness. Eager to sow terror, Queen Frilogarma bargains with her forest kin, offering powerful magic items and sending her most amoral denizens into villages and farmsteads for heinous and horrifying murders. Her true interest, though, lies in exploiting these relationships, to rally the surface fae under her banner and compel them to serve her in the darkness below. Aspodell Keep. In response to the various border disputes, Andoran has established a large armed keep at the apex of the Aspodell Pass. The pass is one of the few relatively safe passages through the wild and monster-infested mountains, but of course few merchants favor overland travel in the inner sea, especially given the cold welcome that many will experience crossing between Cheliax and Andoran. Nevertheless, a small trade route does follow this path, connecting the Isgari city of Hogan's Ear, just across a stretch of Chelish territory, with the Andoran town of Pirin's Bluff. Pirin's Bluff. This is a small but significant hamlet located just east of the Aspodell Pass. With a population of just over 250 people, Piran's Bluff consists of a high-walled keep surrounded by a palisade protecting a simple hamlet of trappers, miners, and merchants. It serves as a center of commerce for a number of the even smaller villages and independent farms that can be found scattered across the Aspodell foothills. 15 years ago, as of current recording in 4708, Piran's Bluff served as the key location to the first edition Pathfinder module Tower of the Last Baron. As described in my history section, the Andoran nobility faced a difficult choice after the revolution: side with the people of Andoran and forfeit their titles, or be exiled to Cheliax and renounce their ties to Andoran lands. A brave few nobles, however, chose neither side, unable to relinquish their cherished nobility and unwilling to side with the foreign empire. The most famous of these was Baron Vendicon, once master of a large barony, but after the revolution controlling lands little more than a few miles around his keep in Piran's Bluff. From the end of the revolution in 4669 to the date of that adventure in 4708, so almost 40 years, Vendicon continued to call himself Baron and continued to rule in Piran's Bluff. The Andoran government tolerated his refusal to comply with the secession edicts as long as he paid his taxes on time, as they had other more pressing matters to deal with. Unfortunately, Vendicon continued to grow more and more bitter at his loss of station in his waning years. Finally, seduced by promises of power, both political and arcane, Vendicon helped arrange a small army of Chelish soldiers to come through the Aspodell Pass. In conjunction with this plot, the Baron recanted his neutrality and vowed to hand over Piran's Bluff to his allies in Cheliax. Fortunately, as detailed in the last Baron module, a group of heroes were able to intervene, subvert his plot, and depose the Baron. Based on possible outcomes of the module, in all likelihood Baron Vendicon was replaced as governor of Piran's Bluff by the former captain of the Tower Guard, Blacklock. As this was one of the earlier modules Paizo ever produced, and as 15 years is quite a long time ago, it's likely Governor Blacklock has also since been replaced as the leader of Piran's Bluff, but regardless, the deposition of Baron Vendicon marked the very last titled aristocrat to hold power in the country of Andoran. The Gallery of Wonders. In their quest for the sky, the dwarves of the Age of Darkness built innumerable mountain strongholds and settlements on the journey to the fabled High Helm and the Five Kings Mountains. They also kept meticulous records of the places they built, but ultimately abandoned when they moved on. One place of repute had a great hall constructed by the renowned dwarf craftsman Barak Trionger, along with a collection of Barak's lost workshops known in legend as the Gallery of Wonders. Eventually, a descendant of Barak's, Torvik Strathmain, sought out his ancestors' ancient gallery. Accompanied by a trio of Aspodell rangers, they mounted an expedition to uncover the gallery. Unfortunately, they weren't the first to discover it. A cruel fey creature had claimed the craftmaster's shadowed galleries, a worshipper of nightmares who called herself Lady Moralaith. Born of the unnatural union between an elvish mother and a nameless creature of darkness, Lady Moralaith possessed the terrifying power to reshape dreams and bring them to hideous life. Torvik and his allies found themselves prisoners within Barak's workshop. Inhuman tortures and vile fungal concoctions muddled Torvik's memories. Fortunately, Torvik managed to escape with one of the rangers and sought out the Pathfinder Society to recruit help and rescue his other captured friends. The details of this expedition are played out in the Pathfinder Society adventure The Beggar's Pearl. The Crystal Falls. A breathtaking cascade descends from the southern Aspodells, forming a majestic waterfall. Plummeting from an elevation of nearly 1,000 feet, it crashes into a broad and tumultuous pool below. Some years ago, Chelish spies stumbled upon the site while infiltrating Andoran's borders during a massive storm. Seeking refuge, they found the shelter in a cave concealed beneath the waterfall's cascade. Post-storm, the spies continued their journey into Andoran's interior, but continued to use the cave as a hideout for subsequent incursions. Today, Chelish agents frequently lurk in the cave, capturing and eliminating trespassers while employing illusions and trickery to prevent discovery. They perpetuate a rumor that the falls are haunted. Recently, the Chelish spies expanded beyond the cave's main chamber into the intricate tunnels within the mountains. One spy entered into a cavern adorned with colossal quartz crystals resembling a forest of spikes. This forest of quartz contains a community of lampads, a type of deep cave-dwelling nymphs discussed in more detail in my Fey creature feature. The lampads of the Forest of Quartz have now organized, harassing the intruders and seeking to drive them from the caves. A previous confrontation resulted in the death of some lampads, so today they remain at a careful détente. But resourceful adventurers aiming to expose these spies could potentially ally with the lampads that dwell here. Alvis. With a population of over 2,100 residents, Alvis is the largest settlement in the Aspodell territory. Once a small fishing village, Alvis rose to notoriety when it became home to the Andoran Alchemical Society. Rumored to have accidentally caused a series of fires that badly damaged several naval shipyards in Augustana. As its reputation, ill-gained or not, grew, it attracted merchants and scholars from throughout the region, and it has since become one of the foremost marketplaces for alchemical reagents, poisons, and other such oddities. The runoff of the town's alchemical waste has begun to filter into Aspodell Bay, which has started to concern local fishers. These folk claim the waters near the town have taken on a greenish, almost phosphorescent hue, and shellfish harvested from the bay's mouth now have a metallic flavor. At the moment, the society holds a stranglehold on local politics. Local Representative Councillor Bugris Trode and local governing magistrate Neldana Applebraith are both members of the Alchemical Society. However, local fisherman Mogad Grayman has already declared his intent to run for a seat on the People's Council at the next election to curtail the worst habits of the Alchemical Society. Chimera Cove. While numerous small fishing villages can be found among the craggy islets that jut from the coastal bluffs lying east of the Aspodell River, the village of Chimera Cove stands out for its geologically unique environs. It takes its name from 3 large islands that shelter its harbour, the Goat, the Lion, and the Dragon. The town is quite young, and its isolated and somewhat precarious location have prevented the town from developing into a commercially successful fishing port. Still, the residents manage well enough to survive year after year, and have a small enough population to easily sustain themselves through subsistence farming and fishing. The village of Chimera Cove was raided by a band of hobgoblin mercenaries in the standalone Pathfinder module, The Treasure of Chimera Cove. In this adventure, the villagers are rescued from raider camps with the aid of the village outcast, Targus, a quiet man who is now well regarded in the village for his hand in saving the town, despite widespread knowledge of his previously closely guarded secret, that he was in fact born with a curse of lycanthropy and is of the werebear kindred. The Darkmoon Vale. The Vale, a rugged frontier territory, has a grim reputation in Andoran. Despite supposedly being brought under control centuries ago during the pacification of the lawless Kelid natives by General Castalis of Carpenden and the Fourth Great Taldan Army, as well as later attempts to tame the wilds by such figures as Karas the Falcon Novotnian, an Andoran hero from the days of Chelish rule, the Darkmoon Vale remains a perilous land. Its distance from the coast and most major Andoran cities results in limited oversight from the national government, enabling the influential lumber conglomerates to impose their tyrannical and exploitative practices in the region. The Lumber Consortium's keen interest in the area is largely driven by the abundant darkwood trees that populate its numerous forests. Once spanning from the Arthfell in the southern vale to the present-day Darkmoon Wood at the base of the imposing Droskar's Crag, these woods have significantly dwindled to centuries of logging. This depletion has strained relations between the humanoid settlers and the native fae of the woodlands. Additionally, the region harbors a substantial population of lycanthropes, who roam in humanoid guise as marauding bands of hoodlums during the day and transform into terrible wolf packs under the light of the full moon. A pivotal moment in Darkmoon Vale's history was the volcanic eruption of Droskar's Crag, known as the Rending, which occurred in 3980. This cataclysmic event obliterated the dwarven settlement of Jernishal and inundated large sections of the vale with a thick layer of ash and dust, leaving yet more permanent scars upon the land. This rending also awakened the ancient dragon Daralathixil, who considers all the lands from the crag to the rivers to be his own. Fortunately, he is very old and quite lazy, rarely rousing from his lair to cause trouble in the region, but when he awakens, the whole territory knows it. The Isgur Pass. The Aspodell Mountains in the west almost connect with the Five Kings Mountains in the north at the northern end of the Darkmoon Vale, but a shallow valley connects Isgur and Andoran called the Isgur Pass. Despite its considerable distance from most major Andoran cities, the pass is one of the most heavily trafficked land passes out of Andoran. This is because Andoran has a different relationship with Isgur than it does with Cheliax. Isgur is a self-governed colony of Cheliax, part of the Greater Empire officially, but technically ruled by a separate and independent political body. Andoran hopes that its own influences in Isgur might lead to a formal separation with the rest of Cheliax someday, and so they continue to trade with Isgur in the hopes of acquiring goodwill. Additionally, less scrupulous members of the Andoran merchant elite find trade with Isgur to be an effective way of working around the various trade restrictions that prohibit Andoran companies and Chelish companies from working directly with each other. Another example of how Andoran attempts to grow goodwill in Isgur and shape their politics was their recent involvement in the Goblin Blood Wars. They fought to protect the Isgari people from hobgoblin raiders, and even fought alongside the Hell Knights of Cheliax on occasion. Finally, the Isgur Pass serves to connect Andoran with the wealthy nation of Druma. A road on the western side of the Five Kings Mountains leads up to the prosperous Droomish city of Petitioner's Port, just northeast of the Isgari mining town of Dustpawn. The Gold Falls. The Foam River drops over the edge of a tall plateau at the roaring Gold Falls. Gold Falls drops almost 600 feet in two sections, a 350-foot plunge into a deep cold pool at its base, and a 250-foot cascade fed from an ice-crusted glacier in the Five Kings. Gold Falls Inn hangs out at the midpoint, overlooking both the River Foam and the lower Gold Falls, giving guests of the inn spectacular views of the waterfall both above and below. The famous inn has an intriguing history. Initially, it began as a modest dwarven fortress designed to control a wide bridge spanning the river at the fall's summit. However, one of the seismic events during the rending caused the collapse of the bridge. Rendered purposeless and severely damaged, the fortress was abandoned and swiftly succumbed to decay. Over the course of several centuries, the fortress ruins hosted a succession of creatures until 4437, when an explorer named Argus Barrackland stumbled upon gold at the fall's base. Within a year, Argus and a small group of companions cleared the ruins and constructed a sluice amidst the remnants of the once great bridge. Gradually, they fortified a manor house to safeguard the sluice and provide protection to travelers along the riverside trail. Today, Gold Falls Inn stands as a well-defended waypoint on the trail leading from Falcon's Hollow west to the Isgar Pass. The Barrackland family has since gained complete ownership of the inn and continues to operate the nearby sluice. Under the ownership and management of Mearson Barrackland, who is now in his late middle years, revenue generated from the sluice enables the family to offer remarkably affordable rates on food and lodging, making Gold Falls Inn a favored destination for caravans heading north or south, or adventurers looking for work in the Vale. The Darkmoon Plain. Originally a part of the expansive Arthfell forest, this area has undergone a dramatic metamorphosis over centuries of relentless logging. What was once a flourishing expanse of woodlands is now a barren field dominated by decaying stumps and arid grey soil. The bleak history of the Darkmoon Plain is written plainly in its landscape. However, the wise will steer clear of these ruins, as fey curses haunt these sites, and they are now rumoured to be haunted by the restless dead. The Darkmoon Plains are also positioned above a geothermal hotspot, so travelers across the barrens here may sometimes witness the emergence of geysers and vents bursting forth from the ground, showering blighted black earth all around. Notable seismic springs in the Darkmoon Plain territory include the Dragon Spring, where once or twice a year a young red dragon comes to soak in the hot waters; Shaylin's Bow, an irregular geyser that shoots hot steam and water almost 800 feet in the air, cooking anything in an 80-foot radius; the Feaster's Dint, a particularly large mud pot populated by a small community of elemental magmins; and Painter's Pot, where sculptors and painters like to come to collect the naturally heated clay that oozes up from the earth. The Darkmoon Wood and the Droskmere Lake. The Darkmoon Wood is so named because it contains so many precious darkwood trees. It is bifurcated by the Darkmoon River, which flows from the Droskmere, a large lake located in the heart of the woods. The Droskmere is home to various kinds of unique fauna, including the elegant mere swans, who periodically cough up beautiful gizzard stones, much coveted by dwarven artisans from the Five Kings Mountains, as well as the sparkling pop carps, whose distinctive popping noise can be heard all around the shores of the lake. While still counted among the largest collection of darkwood forests in Avestan, Darkmoon Wood steadily decreases in size with each passing year. The logging community of Falcon's Hollow chops away at woods each year, harvesting roughly 7 million board feet of timber, about 5% of which is darkwood annually, almost all of which ends up in Augustana to the south. Formerly connected with the Arthfell forest, centuries of logging has separated the two into two distinct forests, with much of Avestan's remaining darkwood trees standing among the pines and firs within the Darkmoon. At the current rate of logging, the lumber conglomerates estimate the wood only has about 2 more decades before it falls to the lumberjack's axe. Numerous factors are beginning to slow the harvest, though, and an order of Greenfire Druids have emerged, hoping to reach an equilibrium of felling and regrowth in time to prevent the wholesale destruction of the forest. The Greenfire Druids are not the only ones who oppose logging in the Darkmoon. Although greatly reduced in number since the Fourth Army incursions, Fae can still be found in the Darkmoon Wood. The Fae of the Darkmoon serve a single leader, Sintira, the Nymph Queen, a direct emissary from the First World, who holds a distinguished position as one of the 11 eternal monarchs of the Fae. Her presence in these woods predates even the gaze of the first dwarves upon the lush landscapes of the Darkmoon Vale, and she and her court have resided here for eons. Unlike many of her fellow eternal monarchs, Sintira is characterized by a disposition of peace and fairness, qualities seldom found among her kind. In her interactions with mortals, she consistently pursues diplomatic resolutions, articulating her thoughts with a soft and careful speech that never conveys a sense of urgency. As an immortal being, Sintira carefully considers her options, exploring multiple solutions before settling on a course of action. Regrettably, mortals often prove adept at dismissing reason in pursuit of wealth. Consequently, Sintira has found herself leading her fae into short guerrilla wars on more than one occasion. When provoked to such anger, she transforms into a chillingly effective warlord, orchestrating precise hit-and-run strikes throughout the Darkmoon Wood and its environs. Falcon's Hollow. Nestled on a winding trade route, Falcon's Hollow is the most important settlement in the Vale. Serving as home to about 1,500 residents, mostly humans but also dwarves, halflings, and other folks, this blunt, sawdust-choked stop seems to be in sharp contrast with the rest of Andoran. Marred by injustice and cruelty, run by ruthless logging companies, and precariously close to the notorious Darkmoon Wood, the looming presence of Droskar's Crag casts a pervasive gloom over the overworked labourers who inhabit this place. Some arrive with dreams of fortune, seeking to profit from cutting darkwood lumber in the lush wood, while others come to rebuild their shattered lives on the fringes of an untouched wilderness, far removed from the trappings of civilization. Persecuted zealots and other outcasts are also drawn to Falcon's Hollow, finding solace in practicing their unconventional rites without too much oversight. It is governed by a detestable local gabble, or lumber company appointed mayor, named Theldrin Creed, who rules unabashedly from the Lumber Consortium headquarters on the northeast side of town. Through his arbitrary decrees and the Consortium's exorbitant prices, Creed and his enforcers effectively oppress the townspeople by keeping costs of living high and wages down. Other important figures in town include the town's gruff half-elven sheriff, Deldrin Bailson, the halfling magistrate Vamros Harg, who dispenses merchant licenses and stamps mining and lumber claims at the Hollow Tribunal, the town's courthouse, the gnome Brickasnerd Hildrinsocks, the owner of a sizable general store in town called the Goose and Gander, Tavern Keep Jack Crimmy, who owns the Jackanapes, the largest inn and tavern in town, and finally Priestess Kirthana, the local priestess of Iomade, who continues to struggle to win converts in the beleaguered town. On the outskirts of town, one more lone figure threatens the security of Falcon's Hollow. The lone hermit Sharvaros Vade, who lives on the outskirts of Falcon's Hollow, distraught by the death of his wife Amel, has turned to the study of necromancy. Although in years past Sharvaros has proven an ally to Theldrin Creed, who had no qualms about putting the dead to work for him, a recent falling out between the two of them have led Sharvaros to become increasingly paranoid and foul-tempered. It is said he is raising a secret army of the living dead, a fact that Creed is either unaware of or is quietly ignoring and hopes will go away on its own. The Lumber Consortium's main camp, situated within an unsightly expanse of clear-cutting approximately 15 miles from Falcon's Hollow, this efficient and lucrative camp consists of about 5 robust log structures, a bunkhouse, a meal hall, an office, a barn, and a smithy, and supports around 30 individuals. Owned by the Lumber Consortium, this industrious camp employs all of its residents primarily as lumbermen, with all 23 of them lodging in the bunkhouse. The camp's overseer, Jarlbrand Trukshavitz, resides in a small room attached to the exterior of the disheveled and taxidermy-filled office where he conducts his work. The Cold Marrow. At the eastern edge of the Darkmoon Wood, a broad and low hill can be found in a clearing. Ascending the mound, a set of fractured stairs is flanked by 2 colossal menhirs crafted from white marble and adorned with symbols of enigmatic origin. Positioned at the foot of these stairs, 2 immense stone discs, each akin to a giant's wagon wheel in size, rest atop one another, their edges subtly overlapping. These discs bear thousands of runes etched in chaotic patterns. This is a haunted place, and those that visit it find the experience unsettling and disturbing, so it has come to be called the Cold Marrow. As to who built it and what its purpose is, that remains unknown. The Wolfrun Hills. The Wolfrun Hills unfold as a grassy incline crowned with small clusters of pine and fir descending into rocky grottos that lie in the low basalt cliffs between the hills. The gently sloping western hills, adorned with plant life like grasses and low shrubs, provide habitat to various animals, including packs of the eponymous wolves. On the eastern side, facing the Andoshan, the hills turn more ragged and rugged, hosting hardier plants and more perilous creatures, such as packs of direwolves, and likely secretive tribes of werewolves like the Shadow Pack, for which the region is infamous. Between these extremes lies a jagged transition zone. Here, in the area between lush and rough, hills terminate abruptly or rise into crumbling cliffs, grottos offer refuge to dark druids and heartless bandits, and trickles of water meander for miles before suddenly disappearing. One site of note among the hills is the Grotto of St. Elth. This small grotto houses a meticulously maintained shrine to Sarenrae, featuring a large statue of Saint Elth standing over the injured Pontius Cassava, facing down a chimera. For his bravery that day, the high priest of Sarenrae and Almas posthumously granted Elth sainthood, and the spirit of Saint Elth appears in this shrine, acknowledging the presence of other Sarenite clerics with a crooked smile. Recent reports from Sarenite pilgrims, however, suggest that Saint Elth's spirit is looking increasingly melancholic during these appearances. Another notable location is the Wolf Head, a defiantly standing inn atop a crumbling hillside. This heavily guarded establishment takes its name from the distinctive shape of the building. Passing through numerous families and owners since it was first built, the current proprietor, a capricious halfling named Dop, serves anyone who enters, but possesses a peculiar ability to sniff out lycanthropes, whom he does not permit entry. Those who resist find themselves thrown out through the Wolf Head's wolf mouth, overlooking a 50-foot drop to a patch of wolfsbane below. The Arthfell. Originally stretching north to the foothills of the Five Kings Mountains, the Arthfell was split in two, the north section becoming the Darkmoon Wood, and has slowly reduced in size ever since. The Arthfell today, while less than half of its original size, still contains numerous secrets both dangerous and bizarre. The Arthfell territory comprises both the forest, but also the nearby mountains, hills, and plains west of the Andoshan River. The Arthfell Forest. The surviving portion of the Arthfell Forest still stands as one of Galarian's most ancient living woodlands, with roots believed to extend from the material plane into the First World itself. Although Queen Sintira of the Eternal Monarchs holds her court in the Darkmoon Wood, many of her subjects reside in the Arthfell. To the Fae that still inhabit the Arthfell, this forest embodies the divine essence of nature, endowed with the power to infuse both magic and beauty into the land. In addition to the Fae of the Arthfell, various groups of druids inhabit the Arthfell as well, some more friendly to Andoran than others. One moderate group is the Greenfire Circle, who have acted as intermediaries between the region's industrious humans and its natural residents for a long time. Most of the Greenfire druids live in the Arthfell, though a handful reside in the Darkmoon Wood, in the Wolfrun Hills, at the base of the Aspodell Mountains, or around the various hot springs of the Darkmoon Plains. The current leader of the Greenfire Circle is High Druid Tablik. Tablik is a charismatic but deeply private man, concealing a difficult and haunting past. At one time, Tablik was a pesh addict in Almas. He ran with a rough crowd and committed his first violent crime at the tender age of 9. For his 15th birthday, Tablik's dealer gave the boy a concussion and a broken rib when Tablik tried to pay for a dose with too little coin. When he recovered, Tablik murdered a merchant and bought enough pesh with the stolen coin to kill a horse. Fate intervened when druids found him staggering alone in the woods in a deep stupor. Nursing him back to health, Tablik eventually found a measure of peace in druidic life. Raised in the cities but adopted by the woodlands, Tablik has always had a foot in two worlds. His rise to power among the Green Circle was surprising but not unwelcome to other senior druids. Tablik still maintains a close relationship with the civilized folk of the cities, and one notable connection is that he has married Ingrid Odebear in a secret ceremony 10 years ago. Ingrid Odebear is the commander of the Diamond Regiment, a specialized unit tasked with protecting Andoran's central lands from raids by the many werewolf tribes of the Darkmoon Wood and the Arthfell Forest. In fact, this is not the first time I've mentioned Ingrid, as I have also discussed her in my Werewolves and Other Lycanthropes creature feature, as she is herself, in fact, a werebear, a secret not known by most members of the Diamond Regiment. Not all druid sects of the Arthfell are as diplomatic as the Greenfire Circle, however. The Third Vale is a more secretive group of druids, who abducts loggers who stray too far from their camps. According to one account, High Druid Tablik became head of the Greenfire Circle when he defeated a previous leader in combat. Embittered by his loss, it was the former Greenfire High Druid who founded the Third Vale. Festering in his anger and resentment, the High Druid of the Third Vale has made an enemy of both the Andoran state and of various other druid groups. Yet even the Third Vale are not the most feared druidic circle of the Arthfell. Under the guidance of their bestial archdruid, the Blooded Stag, the Circle of the Fey Pact engage in worship of potent, capricious, and ancient Fey lords through ritualistic and often bloody ceremonies. While they certainly don't consider themselves to be malevolent forces in the woods they inhabit, these druids' penchant for violence and cruel demeanor towards most Andorans in the area has provided the Lumber Consortium with a means to vilify them, and by extension all druids, in the eyes of the common folk. Finally, the Arthfell is home to another group of humans, much more friendly to the Andoran citizenry than all the sects of druids. The secretive order of rangers known as the Fangwatch patrol the Arthfell, protecting the Andoran citizenry from the worst predations of the region's werewolf packs, especially the Shadow Pack. Led by charismatic and boisterous Rutho Stegerson, the Fangwatch numbers fewer than 50 individual rangers, but they are remarkably effective despite their small numbers. They also coordinate closely with both the Diamond Regiment, Andoran's officially sanctioned anti-lycanthrope military unit, and the Green Fire Circle. In fact, it was Rutho that introduced Ingrid Odebear of the Diamond Regiment and the High Druid Tablik. Rutho's second in command is also a close friend of Ingrid's, the ranger Aurora Kaseva, who like Ingrid is secretly a lycanthrope as well, though of the werewolf lineage. This, of course, is a closely guarded secret, and even among those who know the truth, it remains a mystery why Aurora is so committed to hunting down her own kind. The Moonsilver Pool. A relic left over from the reign of Forest King Narvan, the Moonsilver Pool is a shallow reflecting pool that stands in a quiet glade near the northern edge of the forest. Thick plates of pure silver, somehow immune to tarnish, form a narrow lip around the pool and pave most of its bottom. Despite its extreme beauty, the pool is a place of grave danger, particularly at night. Werewolves of the Shadow Pack consider the Moonsilver Pool a holy site and protect it viciously. The Shadow Pack is a reactionary group of werewolves, including a great number of powerful lycanthropic druids, who routinely raid logging camps and farms and villages, and occasionally even larger settlements as well. The Fangwatch and the Diamond Regiment are aware of the large concentration of Shadowpack wolves that make pilgrimages to the Moonsilver Pool, but lack the numbers to address such a high concentration of werewolves. Visiting the pool is therefore extremely dangerous. Non-werewolves, and even some werewolves who have not yet proved their loyalties, are typically torn apart on sight if they stray too close to these sacred waters. The Ether Vale. Although there are no prominent elven settlements in the Arthfell, a site of arcane significance called the Ether Vale on the western side of the Arthfell suggests that an elven community might have dwelt here at one time, likely having retreated back to Kionin before the Earthfall cataclysm. In this glade, elven glyphs magically appear, presenting themselves to visitors as divinatory portents of things to come. The origin and meaning of the Ether Vale is not precisely understood, not even by visiting elvish scholars from Kionin. Ulfden. The largest logging town of the Arthfell is more than twice the size of Falcon's Hollow, at almost 4,000 residents, though it likely offers less excitement to your typical adventuring party. The residents of Ulfden are not oblivious to the eventual decline in logging revenue, foreseeing the end of this industry not necessarily in their lifetimes, but likely in the lives of their children. Consequently, Ulfden is actively seeking new reasons to attract people to the area and redefine its purpose. The town hosts dozens of small shops, inns, and businesses catering to the requirements of the courageous. Positioned not quite halfway between Falcon's Hollow and Origent, and perched on a low cliff along the Elberwick Rise, Ulfden serves as the principal civilizing force in the expansive dale. Collaborating with the Diamond Regiment, whose headquarters, Adamus the Gleaming Tower, stands nearby, and the secretive Fangwatch of the Arthfell, Ulfden remains vigilant in suppressing werewolf threats and ensuring the safe passage of convoys laden with precious darkwood. The town has not always been so safe, however. In the summer of 4707, in an event commonly known as the Night of Silver Blood, Ulfden experienced a terrible siege by a coordinated army of werewolves, supported by hobgoblins and dark druids. What added to the terror of this invasion was their seeming immunity to silver, normally a lethal weapon against them. Thankfully, the beasts were eventually defeated when local Pathfinder Society venture captain Luna Aldred rallied the town soldiers and helped them hold until reinforcements could arrive. She gave her life in defense of the town. A plaque and statue commemorating her courage were commissioned. Curiously, no further instances of silver-immune werewolves have occurred after that night, feeding various unfounded speculations and rumors about another Night of the Silver Blood in the future. Recently, in 4721, almost 15 years after the Night of Silver Blood, venture captain Luna Aldred was resurrected in the course of the 2nd edition Pathfinder Society adventure Enter the Pallid Peak. Luna Aldred is still alive and remains in Ulfden, where she has established the Silvermoon Sanctuary, which serves as both a Pathfinder Lodge and an animal sanctuary. Points of interest in Ulfden include the Ulfden Town Hall. This large stone building in the center of town is the most impressive structure in Ulfden. Just outside the building, a beautiful fountain featuring a marble base and a bronze sculpture of soaring falcons, called the Five Falcon Fountain, decorates the building's courtyard. The town's important civic leaders, including elected councillor Carly Siegefrost, local mayor Gilmore Amring, and commander of the town watch Eric von Sett, can also often be found in the building or in its courtyard. The Hall of Sarenrae. The largest single temple in the Arthfell is the Hall of Sarenrae in Ulfden. Despite its unassuming exterior, the interior of the building reveals exquisite decorations along its walls and columns. High Priestess Lyselle, a kind and patient woman in her twilight years, has guided the temple for over 30 years now. The Silver Bullet. One of the largest and most popular inns in town, the Old Silver features an expansive tavern on its lower level that proves favorable among locals as well as those staying at the inn. As a large inn, the Silver Bullet almost always has at least a few open rooms. The Silver Bullet is also the most likely place one might encounter the light-hearted copper dragon Wataxashil. Discussed in more detail in my Dragon's Creature feature, his first appearance in the town was a well-documented arrival during a werewolf siege of Ulfden in 4657, a different and less brutal raid than the infamous Night of Silver Blood. When the young dragon arrived and aided in the defense of the town, the mayor and other civic leaders thanked him and invited him to visit as often as he liked. An offer he obviously took to heart. Neither menace nor folk hero, Wataxashil ostensibly lives in a deep lair in the Wolfrun Hills, but in truth spends most of his time in Ulfden, frequenting the Silver Bullet and happily injecting dwarven gold into the town's economy. He is now a semi-permanent fixture there, frequently adopting the guise of a ginger-haired man who famously overdrinks whenever he stays at the inn. The Elberwick Rise. Stretching south to the Nagortha Peaks, the low plateau of Elberwick Rise actually extends both west through the northern Arthfell forest and east beyond the forest itself, overlooking the large city of Origent. Among the various threats lurking in the northern wilds of Andoran is a group called the League of Souls, who operate out of a secret hideout along the rise itself. The group is a cult dedicated to Zon Kuthon, who secretly plan and execute horrific torturous murders to appease their dark patron. They also maintain an alliance with the Caligny of the Shadow Caverns, and know the secret underground paths that connect the Elberwick Rise to the Darklands passage of the Candlestone Breach. Adamas, the Gleaming Tower. Adamas is the command center of the Diamond Regiment. A special military division of Andoran's armed forces, they were tasked with dealing with the lycanthrope problem in the northern hinterlands. Today they are led by Commander Ingrid Odebear, who coordinates closely with her close friend and ally in the Fangwatch, Aurora Kaseva, and her husband, the High Druid of the Green Circle. As a natural-born werebear, indeed her family derives from a long lineage of ursine lycanthropes from the Linorm kingdoms where such things are better tolerated, Ingrid has no problem controlling her transformations and only gives in to her animalistic urges in moments of true desperation. Nevertheless, she rightfully fears that the common folk of Andoran might not understand the difference, and thus her lycanthropic heritage is a closely guarded secret held by only her most trusted confidants. Origent. Origent is the cultural capital of the Arthfell territory and the largest inland city in Andoran. It has a population of over 25,000 people, and has for decades served as the stronghold for the corrupt Lumber Consortium. This organization's monopoly on lumber resources within Andoran's interior has granted it immense influence, effectively dominating the city's political and economic landscape. Though not officially governing the city, the consortium's uncontested power extends to almost every facet of local governance. Over centuries, they have exploited struggling landholders, pushing them into debt, acquiring their properties, and transforming the lands into impoverished mill towns beholden to the consortium. As a consequence of the Lumber Consortium's dominance, Origent has evolved into a densely populated and squalid maze of cramped shacks and makeshift dwellings, nestled between towering structures and dilapidated buildings occupied by squatters. The city also bears visible scars from enduring tremors over the centuries, with citizens adopting a practice of hanging bells over their doorways as an early warning system. These bells, now ubiquitous across the city, serve as a means for the city guard to communicate coded messages and warnings during tremors. With a population substantial enough to warrant multiple councillors, all of whom are Lumber Consortium associated, and chief among whom is the influential councillor and Lumber Consortium gavel Drogan Spites. Suspicions surrounding Spite's numerous victories have led the People's Council to appoint Golden Eagle Commander Esbet Regar, a paladin of Iomade, as the city's magistrate. This move, an obvious attempt to curb the political dominance of the Lumber Consortium, has heightened tensions between the Consortium and the Andoran government. Origent experiences an influx of labourers during the felling season, drawn by the promise of quick earnings from the demanding and hazardous, but sometimes well-paying seasonal jobs. This surge also attracts merchants seeking to capitalize on the economic boom, resulting in overflowing coffers for establishments like brothels, inns, and taverns. The Lumber Lodges district caters to these temporary labourers and their needs. The Lumber Yards is another district, enclosed in the city's northwestern quarter, and plays a crucial role in processing and storing woods. Old Quarter Square, centered around a crooked bell tower, has served as a meeting place for merchants since the town's inception, while the Stone Market, a bustling marketplace of pushcarts and wagons, takes over the square during the week. The Origent base, established during Chelish rule, serves as a military station, defending the province's borders and launching attacks against various threats, including werewolf packs and hobgoblin raiders. Captain Prass Windstill leads a small contingent of Golden Legionnaires here, reporting directly to the magistrate. While the lumber industry dominates Origent's economy, other sectors such as ore refining, metalworking, and glassworking contribute to the city's economic diversity, and much of this work can be found in the city's smelting yards. Some laborers here have managed to acquire equipment repurposed from ancient dwarven settlements from the surrounding mountains. A final district is known as the Squats, and here a significant portion of Origent's population rents plots from the lumber consortium, building small dwellings on these lands. The housing here is cheap, and this is therefore one of the more impoverished neighborhoods of the city, rarely cleaned and rife with crime. The Arthfell Peaks, the Nagortha Peaks, and the Nagortha Necropolis. In ancient times, Kelid tribes occupied these peaks and the surrounding lands. However, plague introduced by early foreign settlers decimated most of the tribes, compelling the survivors to withdraw into seclusion. Contemporary accounts depict the people of the Nagortha Peaks as secluded highlanders, their isolation over centuries leading to malnourishment and inbreeding. These portrayals may be somewhat exaggerated, but this stigma means locals are generally fearful of these cliffs. Located among the peaks, the Nagortha Necropolis is a vast burial site. These barrow mounds are the final resting place of hundreds of Kelids who once inhabited the region, but who were pushed out in 1707 by Taldor's bloody campaign of western expansion. Many of the burial mounds have been emptied by grave robbers or been excavated by pathfinders, although many also remain to be explored. Explorers have also reported the presence of rage wights, undead barbarians who violently protect these ancient tombs. The Missa Shelf. The Missa Shelf is a craggy peninsula that pokes out of the Andoran mainland in a broad triangle. Thanks to the warm climate and regular but inconstant rainfall brought in by the easterly winds along the North Tack, the lands between the Shelf and the Arthfell are incredibly fertile, and the entire region now resembles a pastoral wonderland with rolling hills, safe farmsteads, and herding fields. When the Third Army of General Corentin formally conquered these lands, it was here that the first fortresses were constructed, military bastions that would be used to pacify the lands from the Kelid, the Goblin, and the Orc. Around these fortresses, cities bloomed, and so today the Shelf remains one of the more densely populated parts of Andoran. Augustana. The second largest city in Andoran, Augustana boasts a dual identity as a military seaport and the cultural and economic capital of the Missa Shelf coastline. Fueled by the lumber trade, Augustana's shipyards are the thriving and beating heart of the city. The 20-year-long naval war with Cheliax following the secession forced Augustana to build a great many battleships, in turn securing its position as a premier shipbuilding site in the Inner Sea. To support this industry, Augustana possesses not one but two separate harbors: the Great Salt Harbor, the larger seaward port, and the Fresh Harbor, formed by the gradual slowing of the Arthfell into the Inner Sea, creating a basin of brackish water. Fleet Bridge and Market Bridge, two low structures, span the waters between the two harbors. Though large capital ships cannot cross into the Fresh Harbor on account of the bridges, plenty of smaller dinghies, caravels, and galleys constantly traffic to and fro between the harbors. Important figures in the city include Mayor Radus Menadian, Consul Admiral of the Andoran Navy Haskell Whaley, Lumber Consortium Gavel Nevissa Relant, and the High Priestess of Gosrae Meandri Hembor. Augustana is also the headquarters of the Seven Houses, a covert organization formed by former nobles seeking to regain the wealth and power once flaunted by their families before the establishment of the new republic. The Seven Houses consist of several hundred members from 7 powerful noble families of Taldan descent. Operating in major cities like Augustana and the capital of Almas, the Seven Houses subtly influences local politics, sometimes posing as common folk to gain positions on the People's Council. Using this influence, they manipulate trade routes, customs, laws, and taxes for their benefit. The organization also employs directly criminal methods, including assassinations, murders, blackmails, and kidnappings to acquire power. Prominent members of the Seven Houses include Eduarmo de Vorges and Priala Latourne, both who live in Augustana. Augustana is internally divided into 7 districts, and these are as follows. Admiralty Hill. Nestled at the northwestern tip of the river mouth, Admiralty Hill houses the halls and manors of affluent naval officers and merchants. Fort Constance, an imposing fortress atop a small rise, serves as the Consul Admiral's headquarters, guarding a formidable marine force. Arsenal District. Stretching along the north shore of the Great Salt Harbor, this expansive district hosts shipyards, moorages for commercial vessels, and facilitates a significant portion of foreign trade passing through Augustana. The district takes its name from nearby Arsenal Island, the official home of much of Andoran's naval fleet. Copperdown. Encircling the marshy eastern coast of Fresh Harbor, Copperdown is a densely populated slum marked by closely packed shacks adorned with windblown refuse. It faces challenges such as territorial disputes and resource struggles, giving rise to covert shanty gangs aiming to secure their interests through thuggery and intimidation. Fleet. Known as a labyrinthine commercial district, the Fleet is a bustling mass of overcrowded markets and street-side merchants. Additionally, Fleet District houses the influential Merchants' Council and the Foresters' Endowment, a society opposing the commercial exploitation of Andoran's natural resources. Old Town. In one of the oldest and most affluent districts, Old Town features historic structures like Andoran's First Bank, the temples of Abadar and Gosrae, the former Regent Master's Court, and Aradin's Feast Hall. Entrepreneur Bria Chestnut has recently restored the feast hall to attract a more vibrant crowd. The Shipyard District. This district, often envisioned as the heart of Augustana, sprawls widely, with timber-framed shops and industrial workhouses crowded along the wharves. Shipbuilders toil tirelessly in foundries with coal fires glowing into the night, crafting vessels that sail all across the inner sea. The Slopes. Beneath Fort Constance's stony gaze, the affluent families of Augustana reside in lavish manor houses. Rumors circulate about Madame Revange, one of the district's wealthiest and most powerful individuals, with ties to the subversive covert organization known as the Seven Houses, hosting secret meetings on her premises. Celian's Watch. Just south of Augustana lies the haunted island of Celian's Watch. The island's grim history involves Commander Camden Andavas, who, defying orders during Andoran's secession from Cheliax, led illicit raids on foreign merchant ships from the naval base. When the Grey Corsairs laid siege to the port, they sank the warship stationed there and captured most of the sailors. A small group, including Camden's top lieutenant Ilracha, survived by hiding but contracted a strain of ghoul fever that devolved them into slavering aquatic Lacedons. While most became typical Lacedons, Ilracha retained her intellect and sorceress powers. Over the years, she has preyed on ships investigating the island. The surrounding waters teem with Lacedons controlled by Ilracha and other creatures attracted to the island's fresh meat, including Sahagan and devilfish. Today, people know well to steer clear of this desolate isle, still dominated by a decaying Chelish lighthouse, which Ilracha uses to lure in unsuspecting sailors to their demise. Laviaton. The peaceful and unassuming village of Laviaton, with a population of not much more than 500, stands as a collection of small, daub-slathered cottages amid the grassy dunes of a shallow seaside bluff. Fisherfolk here use small outriggers and great nets, yielding tremendous catches from midsummer through early autumn. At the end of the season, they salt and smoke fish for export, and long-time exporters such as Waldry Quentz, who runs the Sign of the Blue Sail fishery, are known throughout the inner sea for their high-quality goods. Cyremium. Positioned along the rugged coastline just north of the Cape of Hope, Cyremium is another similarly sized small town, built around an old Taldan fortress. The fortress was heavily damaged during Cheliax's even-tongued conquest in 4081, and following the conquest, the scattered settlers repurposed the fortress stone to construct their town. Though little remains of the original 4 watchtowers, the fortress walls endure, leading to a town square accessible through a stone archway. From here, a dozen small flagstone streets wind through clay-covered wooden structures adorned with faded whitewash. Although a sleepy, uneventful town, recently Cyremium has experienced an unsettling phenomenon. During the past several months, during the new moon, residents wake to discover the shoreline strewn with thousands of dead silver scales, a small and greasy baitfish that typically travels in large schools along the coast. No one knows how or why this is occurring, but it has the locals riled up and spooked. Clace and the Clace Redoubt. Only slightly larger than Laviaton and Cyremium is the village of Clace further up the coast. Like many of these villages, Clace was constructed around a military fortress built during General Corrin's conquests of the 16th century. This fortress is a good deal more intact than Cyremium's and has been fairly carefully maintained over the last 3,000 years. Clace itself would be fairly unremarkable as villages go, were it not for the close proximity of the Clace Redoubt, an ancient subterranean Aslanti fortress occupied by a small settlement of Azarketi. Clace is also slightly notable for being the birthplace of Eagle Knight Commander Reginald Cormoth, although he presently resides in Almas. Powerful Aslanti magic ensured that the Clace Redoubt remained remarkably undamaged despite collapsing into the seafloor. It was discovered by a simple fisherman named Nemzi Sparn, but he never told anyone about it. He simply slipped down on his own late one night with his fishing boat and went diving for treasures. After his death, the townsfolk were curious where old Mr. Sparn had acquired all his wealth, and were shocked to discover a leather-bound journal that provided detailed schematics of the redoubt. The Azarketi had welcomed Mr. Sparn, and when others from the village reported of his death, the Azarketi became friendly with the village overall. It's also said that during the Chelish blockade, the town of Clace was being bombarded by Chelish warships, and the Azarketi welcomed the entire town into the underwater safety of the redoubt, though that may be an exaggeration. In any case, there is no doubt that the now long-standing alliance between the Azarketi of the Inner Sea and the nation of Andoran was likely helped along by the friendship between the village of Clace and the redoubt. It is also rumoured that there are deeper subterranean levels to the redoubt, and that the Azarketi have sealed paths leading below the sea and into the Darklands, controlled by tribes of the Azarketi's more nefarious cousins, the Caligni. Riverford. Located a few hundred miles north of Almas, the town of Riverford sprawls where the old bridge spans the shallowest point of the Andoshan. This position, as one of the few places where an army can cross the Andoshan, renders Riverford strategically crucial. Almas also relies heavily on Riverford for its grain, produce, and cattle supply. Given its strategic importance and agricultural wealth, Riverford and its surrounding territories have been the site of dozens of major battles over the past 3 millennia. Against the land's original Kelid inhabitants, against Orc and Hobgoblin raiders, between Taldor and Cheliax, and later between Cheliax and Andoran. The central part of the town features a single cobbled street, set back from the river, with several dirt side roads leading to private homes, inns, and aging warehouses. On a nearby hill stands the old bridge tower, a stout, fortified bastion serving as the armory for the Riverford militia. The Eagle Knights maintain a commander and small group of soldiers on site for overseeing militia training. Beyond the town, the local pastoral landscape contains very many small cairns and barrows, which serve as modest reminders of the region's violent past. A notable inn and tavern in town is run by Lady Salvrus Therisol. Though she appears to be a modest innkeeper of meagre means, she is in fact of an old noble lineage, once a great and storied name across the old empire. Today, she is in fact a member of the Seven Houses organization. Living under an assumed identity, she collects information from unsuspecting travelers, hoping to find the right kinds of leverage that will enable the group to re-establish some of the clout of the old aristocracy. The Verduran Forest. The expansive Verduran Forest, the largest woodland in all of Avestan, stretches across the border between Andoran and Taldor, covering hundreds of square miles. Despite being one of Andoran's least populated regions, the forest boasts valuable resources, drawing courageous explorers seeking fortunes in lumber, fey treasures, or ancient druid relics from the Selen River flowing through its heart. While a few thousand Andorans reside in small towns on the forest's edge, many humanoid inhabitants, including numerous druid circles, rangers, and hunters, live deep within the woods. These wildlings often disregard political borders, considering the forest itself as the defining boundary. The Guardian Fae in the Verduran Forest never experienced the whole-scale hunting of their kindred, as unfortunately occurred during the bloody conquest of General Castalis and the Fourth Army. Between the Fae, a number of ancient druid circles, and Aleshi Cell of the Firebrands, described in my faction video, the influence of the Lumber Consortium has been greatly lessened here, preserving much more of the forest compared to the fate of the Arthfell and the Darkmoon Vale. Currently, local lumberjacks dominate logging in the Verduran, which the Fae and Druids have decided to allow in small numbers, each transporting their lumber down the Selen for sale, frustrating the Lumber Consortium. Despite occasionally purchasing this wood to maintain monopoly, the Consortium seeks opportunities to consolidate power and bring these independent lumberjacks under its control. The Greenfire Circle and the Third Vale are not the most common druid circles in the Verduran. In addition to the Wildwood Druids, from the Taldan Wildwood Lodge, located in the east, there is another major druid circle in the Verduran, the Primordial Ones. Nearly as elusive as wild fae, these druids interact little with civilized people. When they do, they refer to themselves as the Keth, and claim to be descendants of the first humans. The Primordial Ones live in small matriarchal tribes, led by dominant high-ranking female druids and their warrior sons. They claim the entire western half of the Verduran Forest as their territory, but tend to make their home in only the deepest and most isolated groves, far from potential interaction with the people of Andoran. The city of Bellis. The northeasternmost city in Andoran is Bellis, which sits on the west bank of a fork in the Selen. Just south of the town, a great bridge crosses the Selen here. A marvel of engineering, this mighty bridge has a complex mechanism of gears and pulleys that make it capable of being raised and lowered to allow larger river vessels access to the northern lands of Galt and the River Kingdoms. Although it is deep in the Verduran and close to both Taldor and Galt, it is an Andoran settlement and subject to Andoran law. Although it could be considered the cultural capital of the Verduran Forest territory in Andoran, in truth, forest access to the city is difficult, except by expert rangers and other woodland natives. Most reach Bellis by boat, and many merchants use it as a major port of call, as the Selen serves to connect the inland and Carthen trade circuit with the North Tack. See my Ships of the Inner Sea video for more detail on these trade routes. Nestled between the towering pines of the Verduran Forest and the banks of the mighty Selin River, the serene town of Bellis sits peacefully on a broad rise adorned with bright orange flowers that lend the town its name. In addition to being a vital stopover for northbound travelers, Bellis is renowned for its apiaries, producing prized honey, mead, and wax, widely acclaimed across the Inner Sea. Among the town's most striking features are its flower gardens, with beds of wild and cultivated flowers that line the streets, footpaths, and arbor-covered walkways, creating a picturesque setting. Notable locations in Bellis include the Chapel of Shaelin, a chapel in the forest grove belonging to High Priestess Viviana Albercroft, the Bellis Library, a modest yet eclectic collection of books ranging from beekeeping manuals to volumes of poetry, the Citizens' Watch, where volunteers maintain order, especially during the felling season, enforcing curfew and curbing illegal activities. The Constable House. Led by Constable Adrim Coleraine, the local city watch are the ones responsible for keeping the law in Bellis. The Pit. A riverbank area where transient lumberjacks known as pitjacks gather each spring, bringing both prosperity and their own form of feuding politics to Bellis. The Palace. Owned by Brelam Marsh, the Palace is a tavern near the Pit known for selling ale, cheap mead, and homemade liquor called Jackfire. Another important local figure can also be found on the outskirts of Bellis, Vernon Vesta, the infamous bee-man of Bellis. Vernon became convinced he could decipher the future by observing bee flight patterns. Consumed by this quest, he underwent a bizarre ritual, merging with the bees to become a living swarm with a vague semblance of a man. Despite his transformation, Vernon continues to wander the forests near Bellis. Some still seek out the druid's wisdom by invoking his name. Although he often responds to the call, he rarely grants favors without demanding a steep and ominous price. Finally, I should mention that Bellis was the site of the popular standalone Pathfinder module, Realm of the Fell Knight Queen. In this adventure, a line of mystic wardstones built deep in the forest called the Fengard failed. These were meant to bind Roswen, a dark fey queen, to a realm called the Fell Knight. Roswen's dark armies poured into the forest, and it was only thanks to a brave group of heroes that she was defeated, and the Fengard was repaired. Dead Man's Drop and Devar's Retreat. A few other points of interest can be found close to Bellis. Just northwest lies a bubbling series of waterfalls that locals refer to as Dead Man's Drop, because of a bandit captain who leapt to his death here trying to escape Andoran rangers some 40 years ago. Just a ways south of Dead Man's Drop lies Devar's Retreat, a cozy little woodland cottage situated on a perfectly round hill dotted with fairy cap mushrooms. The cottage is only visible to those in the know, as the cottage's owner, Devar Snowguard, a reclusive but powerful druid, uses illusions and glamours to conceal the cottage from view, except to those who already know of its existence. Caldemin. The desolate and rural town of Caldemin's old wooden homes are starting to show the weathering of time with buckling planks and moss-covered clapboards. Although an old town for this region, it has never grown very much. Inhabited by somewhat insular woodfolk, the town used to rarely see visitors. The rugged hills north of the town, leading up to the Five Kings Mountains, however, has recently become the battleground to two titanic behemoths, a beast called a Red Reaver and another beast called a Grey Render. These two monstrosities clash with alarming regularity, and rumors of this contest has drawn the attention of a small group of intrepid scholars and monster enthusiasts. The town, while not overtly unwelcoming, are growing a little frustrated with what they see as a disruption to their normal peace and quiet. Diggon's Rest. Situated deep in the Verduran lies an old Chelish watchtower named Diggon's Rest, built by the new Chelish Empire shortly after the even-tongued conquest to guard against Taldan reprisal. It towers over the surrounding woodland, giving a fine view of the forest with a clear view to the Isle of Arranway and the Wildwood Lodge. You can see my Taldor Deep Dive video for more details on these locations. The commander that built the tower belonged to the now infamous House of Thrune, and when Commander Diggon Thrune himself died, the tower was left abandoned. Apparently it has since become a den for kobolds and possibly something worse. Diggon's Rest is featured in the 2nd edition Pathfinder Society adventure, The Flames of Rebellion. Fusil. South of Diggon's Rest, Fusil stands as a quaint town whose main industry is the trade of raw quartz in various hues. Fusil boasts ancient stone cottages heated by coal and peat, tracing a history that predates most other settlements in the region, likely dating to before Corran and the Third Army's conquests. The residents, often considered eccentric by outsiders, sustained themselves by trading occasionally with Southlanders for cattle and relying primarily on harvested forest greens. This ancient town has dwelled in the woodlands for so long it now enjoys the protection of at least 3 benevolent fae: Gilialara the Dryad, Cimmeray the Nereid, and Ivanlas the Lampad. This peaceful agreement was brokered by the earliest settlers who had an arrangement with the primordial druids. Opting for harmony, the Fae agreed to care for the town's citizens, providing sustenance, clean water, and valuable quartz for trade. In return, Fusil pledged to maintain peace and balanced coexistence with nature. Mayor Unreal Foghammer, a stern dwarf, keeps up this ancient tradition and guards the town against those seeking modernization or exploitation. Black Forks. In the southern stretch of the Verduran Forest lies a crumbling stone temple, draped in moss and surrounded by thick undergrowth. The temple's towers rise above layers of arches adorned with grotesque carvings of bestial winged creatures. In the daytime, sunlight filters through tiny holes, creating a maze of glimmering shafts that converge on a large pool of black stagnant water on the ground floor. The pool is ancient, serving as the sanctum for an entity called the Dreamer in the Depths, a powerful and near-immortal thing that crawled out of the dark tapestry when the world was young. Monks of a long-forgotten order discovered the pool over 2 millennia ago and built the massive temple around it. Known locally as Black Forks, the monks performed extreme rituals here, using double-headed forks for self-inflicted torture rites. In 2724, goblin hordes, displaced by disturbances in the northern forest, came to Black Forks. They raided the temple and killed the monks with the intent of taking it for themselves, but in so doing they awakened the horror within the pool. The creature emerged, rampaged the forest and the Carpenden Plains, but Taldan soldiers eventually drove it back with a mythical spear. These soldiers eventually rooted out the goblins as well. Fearing a return of the creature, the Taldans left the site undisturbed from that point on. While rural villagers avoid the site, occasional travelers do visit, but are careful to avoid the infamous pool. They marvel at the strange architecture here. It is said primordial druids also hold rituals on the temple's roofs here from time to time, and that a new monastic order has started to make pilgrimages here. They are called the Tenders, and they regularly visit during the new moon, wearing cowled robes and performing silent, deliberate gestures, their true purpose still shrouded in mystery. Steyr. Situated on the southern outskirts of the Verduran is the city of Steyr. This large town has a population of over 2,000 residents and is encircled by a towering plaster wall adorned with expansive murals, portraying the countenances of renowned Galtan revolutionary folk heroes. This enclave consists of modest clay brick homes and over the recent decades has experienced a notable growth, primarily driven by an influx of artists, philosophers, poets, and writers seeking refuge from the tumultuous conditions in the nation of Galt. Thanks to the prized Andoran guarantees of freedom of expression, Steyr has emerged as a prolific producer of captivating artistic and literary creations, and their work has captured the attention and fascination of the educated middle class in Andoran. The town's councillor, a former Galtan herself, Maya Cartson, holds significant sway within the artistic community, and she relies on these connections to access insider information about the unfolding developments in her home country. The Carpenden Plains. All territories in Andoran between the eastern banks of the Andoshan River and the Verduran Forest, as well as the grasslands to the south of the forest, make up what is known as the Carpenden Plains. The Carpenden Plains are what most outsiders think of when imagining Andoran's rolling hills, stretches of farmlands, and wild velds. The Carpenden Plains produce a vast array of vital foodstuffs, including grains, grapes, wines, olives, melons, and vegetables, which are used throughout Andoran and make up a large portion of the nation's edible exports. The region's position between the wilds of the Verduran Forest and the heavily traveled Andoshan means the plains are relatively safe from outside threats, but where there are natural resources, there is also always conflict. Representing the Andoran heartland, the Carpenden Plains are the rural interior of the nation, its population unused to even moderately busy urban life. With few external or local threats on the plains, wanderlust runs strong among the youth here, and many Andoran adventurers first hone their muscles on Carpenden farms before leaving for more exciting endeavors elsewhere in the nation or abroad. Those who remain are often insular and provincial, looking down upon any who rely on others to tend the land for them, who labor in the city to buy food instead of producing it, or who prioritize politics over raising a family. Sourton. In the northern reaches of the Carpenden Plains stretches a long plain of dry, rocky soil. Towards the center of this plain lies the township of Sourton, a semicircular collection of slender stone buildings. The region's rocky soil makes it difficult to farm anything but grapes. The townsfolk rely almost entirely on the production and export of Sourton Red, a cheap but bitter wine. While many from afar joke of the poor quality of Sourton wine, Andoran's working class celebrates it as the drink of the common folk, as the wine's rough flavor and strong bite are free of the pompous stink of nobility. Sourton is thus surrounded by nearly 10,000 acres of vineyards, many of which are owned by the town's mayor, Consul Tercio Andaris, for whom a large percentage of the population work. During grape harvest, workers from the surrounding areas will crowd into the town, seeking the quick pay of these seasonal jobs. Carpenden. The eponymous town of Carpenden is the largest northern township in Andoran. The city is perched on a series of low and peculiarly shaped hills that once offered refuge to early settlers. Over time, Carpenden transformed into one of the region's largest military stations, hosting a significant portion of Andoran's standing armies. It has also evolved into a city comprised of 7 distinct neighborhoods, each situated on its own hill. The 7 districts include Arthfell, a southeastern hill specializing in curing and fermenting olives, requiring vast quantities of salt. Mercenary guards are often hired to protect salt caravans, led by mercenary captain Manos. Beacon. Positioned at the center of the hills, Beacon is known for growing large moon melons. Carpenden Hill. The city's largest and easternmost district features a terraced slope ideal for growing olives and grapes. Wealthy residents own vineyards, and the hill hosts a central square with public facilities and the magistrate's office. Colin. South of Carpenden Hills, Colin enjoys more sunlight and hosts wind-twisted olive orchards. The large and fairly ostentatious estate of Magistrate Ranai Simbar can also be found in the Colin district. Rannet Hill. Renowned for grape production and fine wines, Rannet Hill is also known for its soothsayer, Janaya Cruz, who is reputed to be one of the most accurate diviners in Andoran. Tildencrest. Sustained by a woodworking industry, Tildencrest produces furniture and tools for the other districts. Lumber is imported, so caravans must be protected from bandits, and thus Tildencrest often employs Arthfell guards. West Hill. Initially less desirable for farming, West Hill raises livestock for food and resources, including sheep for meat and wool. Despite being among the poorest citizens of Carpenden, West Hillers are known for their skills as hardy fighters. The village of Arthfell. A small village between Carpenden and Almas serves as a crucial rest stop for merchants and teamsters traveling south. Despite its size, the village prioritizes hospitality, offering a well-stocked inn and a central well for travelers. Arthfell's 200 residents, mainly farmers, provide food and supplies to passing merchants. However, the village has for a long while harbored a secret. 3 green hags from the Verduran Forest have been introducing changeling into the community for generations. While some villagers notice peculiarities in their children, they are fearful to acknowledge the truth. Contrary to typical changeling behavior, most young girls in Arthfell do not experience the call to join their mother's hag covens. Those who do slip away in secrecy, never to return. However, the majority of young changelings contribute positively to the community here, such as Telrana Visco, who runs the inn, and Kurtra Dallas, an exceptional horse trainer. Triella. Triella sits on the Andoran coast. It began as a small seaside trading post, but grew into a large town in only a few short years, due in no small part to its strategic location near the mouth of the Selin River, and the logging camps that provide the steady supply of wood flowing downstream from the nearby Verduran Forest. In addition, Triella's location and resources remain attractive to merchants, pirates, privateers, and others traveling the trade routes by sea. The rough-and-tumble portside town is renowned for its bars, brothels, taverns, and gambling halls that run the length of the waterfront. This popular area, which loggers call the Skids, only constitutes a small portion of the city, though. Shops, markets, warehouses, and private homes crowd the remainder of the streets. Sustan. Just east of Almas, a small coastal village of brightly painted wood shanties clings to the gentle sloping boulders that line the southern coast. According to local lore, a Chelish captain named Erin Sustan founded the town when her vessel crashed on the rocks during an unusually thick fog. The rusted anchor that now marks the entrance to Sustan's harbor was pulled from the wreckage of her ship. In recent years, a well-organized coalition of pirates has arranged random raids on the village. This recurring threat may be connected to a persistent rumor suggesting that Captain Sustan, after her crash, possessed a highly valuable item. There are speculations that she may have hidden or buried the item somewhere in the vicinity of the town, potentially contributing to the cycle of attacks. Freeland and the national capital of Almas. Finally, we get to the Andoran capital of Almas. Perhaps meant to be pronounced as the French Alma, Almas is Andoran's shining capital, and the embodiment of their spirit and egalitarian ideals. To say that Almas is the largest city in Andoran is a radical understatement. Nearly 2/3 of the nation's entire population live within a day's travel of the metropolis. Scores of outlying villages near Almas serve as homes for drovers, farmers, craftsmen, and laborers. This region is known as Freeland, and consists of a large part of lands once owned by Andoran's noble class prior to the People's Revolt. Almas is situated on a series of hills where 3 small rivers, the Tamuth, the Kernite, and the Molten, join the mighty Andoshan shortly before it empties out to sea. Sturdy stone bridges link the city together across the rivers, high enough that riverboats can ship their goods to market without colliding with the pilings. While Almas is considered an independent municipality separate from the nation's central government, nonetheless much of the city's administration is shared with that of the central government. And Dendira Murasek, the nation's supreme elect, also serves as the city's foremost official. The city's districts and points of interest are as follows. The North End. Almas's largest district, the North End, spans the entirety of the city north of the Tamuth River and the Field of Concord. It is full of a number of smaller districts where many small industries center their activity within the city. Almas University. The ivy-strewn campus of the famous Almas University can be found in the North End. While technically any Andoran citizen may apply for acceptance, class openings are few, and competition among those able to afford the tuition remains fierce. The university's principal fields of study include law, politics, philosophy, and history, though their modest school of zoology is also renowned. Noted scholar Philandriel Morgathai serves as the school's provost, a position she has held for over 100 years. Embassy Row. Northwest of the Field of Concord, atop the cobbled river walls, perches a walled-off collection of aged emances that once belonged to wealthy nobles, but now serve as accommodations for visiting foreign diplomats. Not beholden to Andoran law, the embassies and their properties provide foreign dignitaries and their guests political asylum. While a small number of city watch patrols here, under the command of Lucilla Karan, to safeguard the enclaves, embassy leaders are expected to provide protection for their own embassies. The theatres. Between the Endoshan and Molten Rivers stands a small collection of dilapidated Taldan mansions that artists have transformed into apartments, artist studios, and struggling playhouses. The theatres is home to most of the city's many true artists, but the low cost of living has also spawned a number of drug dens and brothels here. Though it's not the most respectable neighborhood in Almas, the district is largely safe during daylight hours. Timberfell. During the initial struggling years of Andoran's independence, the People's Council agreed to sell several parcels of land to the lumber consortium in the northern part of Almas. As a result, Timberfell was born. Though Timberfell is still technically a part of Almas, as the property of the consortium, its jurisdiction falls to the cruel, heavy-handed authority of Gavel Rima Bledthorn. The Tamuth District. The district located south of the Tamuth River contains many of the city's least glamorous jobs and poorest citizens. Balmore's Canal. This shallow canal bisects the Tamuth district from north to south. Designed to transport merchant rafts, it has become a flowing cesspool of both chemical wastes from Smithtown and biological waste from Mugget. The canal has grown into a public embarrassment, to which no one has yet offered a real solution. The Bellows. In the northwestern section of this district, a swath of squat stone buildings houses a small dwarven community known as the Bellows. Descendants of the survivors of Tar Kadurim, the population here is slowly dwindling. The dwarves earn their living by applying their superior skills in Smithtown, or running small shops, working as masons, gem cutters, and silversmiths. At present, fewer than 100 dwarves live in the enclave under the guidance of their spiritual leader, Elgrid Twelvehammers, and they now rely on individuals from outside to send communications to other dwarven settlements throughout Andoran. Recently, an influx of humans have moved into the area, many of whom are workers seeking to apprentice under dwarven masters, hoping to learn new trade secrets. The Iron and Hoof Gates. In Almas's west wall, a pair of tremendous reinforced gates opens the city to trade roads beyond. Connecting directly to the industrial neighborhoods that compose Tamuth district, the dirt streets are wide enough to permit draft animals and wagons, though in heavy rains they transform into impassable morasses. Mugget. A maze of narrow lanes twists between the tall, ramshackle buildings of the center of Almas's meat district, commonly known as Mugget. A broad and heavily trafficked street known as Blackrock's Thoroughfare cuts through the heart of the district, from the stockyards in the southeastern corner near the Iron and Hoof Gates. Throughout the day, covered mule carts loaded with livestock carcasses head down the road to Mugget's numerous butcher shops and tanneries, leaving the cobbles slippery with gore. Along the Blackrock's Thoroughfare stand large structures covered with grit and leaking with acrid smoke of boiling lime and alkaline dust, warehouses used by various operations in the growing tanning industry. Other buildings serve as offices or specialize in livestock transfers. Across the thoroughfare, small alleys thread between butcher shops where meat shanks dangle from porch eaves or on hooks in yellow-stained windows. Smithtown. Throughout the day and well into the evening, the streets of Smithtown ring with the relentless pinging of hammers on anvils, and the fire-warmed breeze bears the sour tang of iron. Master smiths of all specialties, dressed in oil-slicked leather aprons, hover feverishly over glowing flames, their coal-stained faces gleaming, and their eyes hidden behind thick protective goggles. Though there is ample work, competition between shops remain fierce, and the wait for apprenticeships is sometimes several years. While smiths of all types work in this district, most of them craft goods for construction, including tools to support the shipbuilding industry in Augustana or farm equipment for the hinterlands. The Liberty District. The most famous of Almas's quarters, the Liberty District is home to Andoran civic buildings and some of the city's most notable landmarks, as well as famed restaurants, taverns, and inns, such as the Succulent Eel, the Totter's Barn, and the Eagle's Nest. The Archstone Monument. Shortly after Andoran's founding, a delegation of gillmen arrived in Almas bearing the keystone to the Arch of Aridin, a gift symbolizing the Azarketi's support of Andoran's peaceful establishment of equality and freedom. The keystone now stands in the Field of Concord. Touching the keystone is considered good luck. The Citadel of the Supreme Elect. Towards the western end of the Field of Concord stands a walled citadel with a great copper dome, which serves as the executive office and living quarters of the Supreme Elect. A battalion of steel falcons keeps a vigilant watch over its broad campus. About its square stand several other marble buildings, including the House of the Demarchy Assembly and the offices for various consuls, ministers, and other officials. The Field of Concord. Stretching from the Andoshan almost to the city walls, a great cobblestone avenue lined with fountains, statues, and manicured hedges rises towards an old Chelish fortress. Numerous plaques adorn the statuary, and gardens commemorate the deeds of fallen soldiers. Between these lie walkways into small gardened alcoves in which merchants set up stalls and display their wares during the monthly markets. The largest of Andoran's public squares, the Field of Concord is considered the property of all Andorans, and most of the nation's governmental buildings stand on its edge. The Golden Eyrie. Towering over the heart of the Field of Concord is a bastion crafted of massive white marble. Upon its pinnacle stands a great gilded statue of Andoran's adopted patron, the heroic Evoral Talmandor. As commander of the Eagle Knights, General Cormoth currently holds the title of the Lord of the Golden Tower. While both the strategic and symbolic home of the Eagle Knights, the Golden Eyrie is also a functional fortress and houses several thousand of the Order's most skilled soldiers from all three branches of service. The Golden Cathedral. At the east end of the field stands the Golden Cathedral, formerly a grand temple of Aridin and now a gathering place used for secular sermons on the value of the common rule. The cathedral's twin spires make it the tallest building in Andoran. Within lies a vast public library, the largest in Andoran, that is open 24 hours a day to the nation's citizens. Enshrined upon the cathedral walls hangs the tenets of the common rule, and a list of the published writings of these eminent emancipators, poets, and philosophers upon whose ideals Andoran was founded. Dominating the western end of the Field of Concord stands a grand palace that serves as the concourse for the People's Council. The ground floor consists of a colossal amphitheatre crammed with marble benches where the councillors assemble when called to deliberate on the laws and treaties of Andoran's future. The remainder of the palace is divided into hundreds of rooms that serve as personal chambers to various members of the council. It should be noted that though the councillors remain citizens by law, many of them maintain a lifestyle now that mirrors that of the former aristocracy. East Hill. Most of the city's residents live in East Hill, which separates Portside from Liberty District. At its heart, the stone mansions of the wealthy stand overlooking Almas's many landmarks, while further from the district's center, the streets narrow and the houses become smaller. Almas Lodge. The Pathfinder Society's lodge in Almas resides in the soaring twin towers of the former Cathedral of Aridin on the Avenue of the Gods, replaced long ago by the Golden Cathedral when Almas grew beyond its ability to serve. The lodge is run by Venture Captain Brackett, a hawk-nosed man noted for his skill with a blade. It also boasts a curious but alchemically advanced homunculus lab and an extensive library. The Avenue of the Gods. The stunning architecture of the dozen temples, churches, and sanctuaries that line this wide street keeps the avenue crowded with both the pious and the curious. Temples here include those dedicated to Abadar, Caden Kalian, Erastil, Pharasma, Shaylin, and Torag, as well as smaller chapels dedicated to various imperial lords and other demigods. The God's Gate. The largest of Andoran's city gates, the God's Gate provides easy access to visitors to both the Liberty District and the Avenue of the Gods. Since Andoran's emancipation from Chelish rule, the God's Gate has never been closed, a fact most Andorans hold as a source of pride. The Grand Exchange. Almas's largest money exchange stands among the many merchant shops, warehouses, and logistical facilities of Portside. Here one can find not only currency from nearly every nation in the Inner Sea region and beyond, but also agents of those nations, who deal in information, alliances, and underhanded threats. Many adventurers find their way here in the hopes of gaining a contract to explore the far reaches of the world. Portside. Home to Almas's robust foreign trade industry, Portside is largely controlled by the Supreme Elect's ministers. Recent mergers between importing and exporting houses has led to some fear that the Aspis Consortium might try to establish another monopoly here. Grain and salt are the two most important imports, while exports include timber, wine, cheese, and fish.